Chapter 2397 Untitled. Chapter 2397 Untitled. Top prize? A house in the imperial capital. Land prices were exorbitantly high, and people even wrote poems about it. A house with a courtyard would be worth a fortune. Everyone had been dreaming about getting it, but now, things wouldn't be so complicated if someone else hadn't recognized Feng Wu. Wait, isn't she Miss Feng Wu? Gosh, it really is her. If I remember correctly, weren't Miss Qingluan and Miss Feng Wu once called the genius girls of the imperial capital? That's right. I remember that, too. But now, Miss Qingluan is riding a phoenix carriage and giving out gifts, and Miss Feng Wu is competing with us for gifts. The crowd was already on Zhua Qingluan's side, and now that Feng Wu had received the top prize, they became even more displeased. Their comments became quite mean. They believed that after everything they said, Feng Wu, if she had any self-respect, should give away that gift. Chaoga glared at the crowd. She couldn't believe what these people would say or do for money. If Feng Wu gave up the gift, it would look like she had been forced. But if she ignored them, these people would keep attacking her. Chaoga scratched her head and didn't know what to do. When she wanted to comfort Feng Wu, she saw Feng Wu winking at her. There was a smile in Feng Wu's eyes. How could she still be smiling? Chaoga was shocked. So was everyone else. How could she still be smiling? Shouldn't she be fidgeting and flustered? Let's go. Feng Wu patted Chaoga on the shoulder and quickly led her away, leaving the baffled crowd behind. Did she leave just like that? The middle-aged woman couldn't believe it. Doesn't she feel ashamed? Shuizi said, I've never seen anyone so shameless. Someone sighed. I don't think Miss Feng Wu is living very happily in the Feng clan. Only the insiders in Imperial College knew how well Feng Wu was doing at school. And because the Dongseng spies were involved, Emperor Wu had forbidden everyone from talking about what happened in the Gu Manor. Therefore, the common people only knew Feng Wu as she had been when she lost her abilities. Fallen Star Yard. Chaoga finally realized what had happened, and she shouted at Feng Wu, Xiao Wu, you can't accept it. We need to give it back. Feng Wu blinked. Why? Chaoga asked, why? It's from Zhua Qingluan. You're her equal, but if you take the envelope, that means that you're inferior to her. Chapter 2398 Untitled. Chapter 2398 Untitled. Feng Wu smiled. Is that so? Chaoga said, Of course it is. Feng Wu nodded. Chaoga was speechless. Many people will be there to watch us when you cash out that voucher. It'll be so humiliating. Feng Wu grinned. But I'm not going to cash it out. Chaoga said, Then what are you going to do with it? Feng Wu raised her chin. I have a plan. Just then, she heard a ding. After that, she couldn't hear anything Chaoga said because all her attention turned to the fairy in her head. The 11th trial is here, the fairy said excitedly. The 11th trial? Feng Wu was intrigued. The 10th trial had been to find everyone on the revival list of the Dongseng Kingdom, and Feng Wu had discovered the last 3 people in the Gu family. Now that the 10th trial had been completed, the 11th trial was finally announced. Feng Wu was very excited. There were only 12 trials in total. She was on the 11th one. That was to say, she only had one more to go after this one. After that, her beautiful master would wake up again, and he said last time that he would be able to stay a little longer this time. Xiao Wu, what's wrong? Seeing that Feng Wu was in tears, Chaoga panicked. But Feng Wu was talking to the fairy in her head, and didn't know how anxious Chaoga had become. What's the 11th trial? Tell me. Feng Wu urged the tiny fairy. Tell me. The fairy looked timidly at Feng Wu. Feng Wu's stomach lurched. Shit. Whenever the fairy got that look on her face, it meant that the task would be very tricky. Just tell me what it is. Feng Wu tried to appease the fairy. I've completed 10 trials so far. How much worse can it be? Just tell me. The fairy looked up and said, Do you want to hear it now? Feng Wu said, Go ahead. The fairy said, Well, this trial has something to do with Zhuo Qingluan. Feng Wu frowned. Do I need to kill her? Zhuo Qingluan was supposed to be very capable now, and it wouldn't be very easy to do that. The fairy shook her head. It's a little trickier than that. Feng Wu said, Say it. The fairy cleared her throat and said, The 11th trial makes Zhuo Qingluan realize that Jun Linyuan is in love with you. What? Cough, cough. Feng Wu almost choked on her spit. She couldn't believe her ears. She asked angrily, What did you just say? I need to make Zhuo Qingluan realize that Jun Linyuan is in love with me. The fairy nodded solemnly. Feng Wu mumbled, To do that, Jun Linyuan has to actually be in love with me. Chapter 2399 Untitled. Chapter 2399 Untitled. Feng Wu stared at the fairy. Is he? She answered the question before the fairy could. Of course not. The fairy gave her a you idiot look. Feng Wu said, There's something wrong with this task. Jun Linyuan isn't in love with me, so how am I supposed to make Zhuo Qingluan realize it? The fairy nodded. Feng Wu snapped, Why are you nodding at me? The fairy disappeared after that. Xiao Wu, Xiao Wu. Seeing the various expressions on Feng Wu's face, Chaoga was scared out of her wits. She grabbed her shoulders and shook her. Xiao Wu. Wake up. Stop daydreaming. Finally, Feng Wu came back to reality. Makes Zhuo Qingluan realize that Jun Linyuan is in love with me. That's insane, Feng Wu murmured. Chaoga only heard part of it. What did you say about His Royal Highness? Feng Wu rose to her feet. It's nothing. Let me think about it. Luckily, there wasn't a deadline, so she thought that she could stall for some time. You need to complete it in a month, or the 12th trial will never be announced, the fairy said timidly in her head. Feng Wu wanted to scream. A month? Did that mean that she needed to make Jun Linyuan fall in love with her in a month? That was so difficult. Letting Zhuo Qingluan know about it was the easy part. She tried to reason with the fairy. Can we change the requirements a little? Can I make Zhuo Qingluan believe it? She was confident that she could plant that idea in Zhuo Qingluan's head. However, the fairy immediately turned her down. It can't be altered. Feng Wu said, I want to smack you on the head. The fairy cringed and went silent. Feng Wu walked back and forth in the room, grinding her teeth. Xiao Wu. Chaoga was baffled. Feng Wu said, Go ask around. Find out where the crown prince is. Chaoga said, Xiao Wu, you're not in love with the crown prince, are you? Feng Wu said, That's not important. Find out where he is first. Chaoga glanced at her. Xiao Wu had always been level-headed, but whenever the crown prince was involved, she would become quite jumpy. She clearly had feelings for him. Will Xiao Wu fall in love with the man? Chaoga didn't like the idea, but she still went to ask around as Feng Wu instructed. She went to see Feng Sun because he would definitely know where the crown prince was. Hearing Chaoga's description of Feng Wu, Feng Sun said, I knew that Xiao Wu would come to Boss Jun, and I was right. Boss Jun has some errands to run today, but he'll be at the 9th hall tomorrow. Tell Xiao Wu to find him there. At the same time, the Zhuo family. Zhuo Qingluan arrived outside the Zhuo manor in her phoenix carriage. The Zhuo family was thrilled, and Mrs. Zhuo ran out of the house, wanting to give Zhuo Qingluan a big hug. However, when she was a meter away from her daughter. Chapter 2400 Untitled. Chapter 2400 Untitled. Mrs. Zhuo was stopped by an invisible force and couldn't move any closer. Zhuo Qingluan gave her a long, hard look. Tongke knew that look well. It was a look of contempt. Mrs. Zhuo was still holding her arms out, when Zhuo Qingluan walked past her and into the house without so much as a glance. Mrs. Zhuo looked like she had been slapped. What are you doing, just standing there? Go with her. Master Zhuo reminded her. Mrs. Zhuo felt very sad. Zhuo Qingluan had been cold 5 years ago, but not to this extent. Feeling hurt, Mrs. Zhuo murmured, but she. Master Zhuo glared at her. She's the sacred lady of Firmament Palace now and second only to the palace master. She's not the little girl who rolled around in your arms anymore. That was a reminder to Mrs. Her husband was right. Zhuo Qingluan was a spiritual king now, and everyone in the Junwu Empire knew of her. That thought made Mrs. Zhuo feel a little better. Her plan had been to complain to her daughter as soon as she was back, telling her how Feng Wu had killed her siblings, but now, Master Zhuo said, you shouldn't bring it up. Wait until she asked. That'll work better. Mrs. Zhuo agreed. However, no matter how long she waited, Zhuo Qingluan never mentioned any of her siblings. Mrs. Zhuo was deeply disappointed. Despite the Zhuo family's hospitality, Zhuo Qingluan behaved like a guest in a hotel. She went back to her courtyard and wouldn't receive any visitors. Tongke was a maid from Firmament Palace and had little feelings for the Zhuo family. In Phoenix Yard, Zhuo Qingluan frowned as soon as the door was closed. It's too noisy. Her kinsman's ingratiating gazes annoyed Zhuo Qingluan. Tongke knew how little her lady thought of the common people, so she said, Miss Qingluan, if you don't like it here, how about we go and stay at Firmament Pavilion? Firmament Pavilion was the imperial capital branch of Firmament Palace, and the sacred lady could use the resources there freely. The only person Zhuo Qingluan wanted to see in the imperial capital was, send this letter for me. Zhuo Qingluan had just finished writing a letter. Tongke saw that her lady had washed her hands and put on some incense before she sat down to write the letter, and it took her a whole hour to finish it. She was very surprised. Back in Firmament Palace, nothing seemed to concern their sacred lady, but now she was so serious about this letter. Who was it for? Zhuo Qingluan wouldn't usually bother herself over such petty matters, but today she folded the letter and put a fragrant rose petal in it. After sealing the envelope, she told Tongke, go to the Crown Prince's residence and give the letter to His Royal Highness. His Royal Highness? As in the famous Jun Linyuan? Tongchua's eyes lit up. Chapter 2401, Untitled. Chapter 2401, Untitled. Tongke had occasionally heard people tease the sacred lady with the crown prince together over the years. Zhuo Qingluan would chide those people, but afterward she would always smile. Now? Zhuo Qingluan prompted. Yes. Tongke happily went to run the errand for her. She was thrilled to know that their sacred lady had a relationship with the famous crown prince. Because she knew that when a noble lady married, their maid usually became the new husband's concubine. Tongke was from a good family herself, so the prospect of becoming a concubine didn't excite her much. However, becoming Jun Linyuan's concubine was a completely different story. The crown prince had 2 residences, which was unprecedented. He said he needed the freedom, or he would stop being the crown prince. What could Emperor Wu do? In the end, he had to build another house for Jun Linyuan outside the palace. Jun Linyuan never stayed at his residence in the palace. Instead, he usually lived in the other one. Tongke was confident that she would be warmly welcomed by the crown prince's residence. After all, she was from Firmament Palace. The Firmament Palace. However, she was received by the doorman first. The old man didn't react to the name of Firmament Palace, but he almost jumped when he heard Zhuo Qingluan's name. Zhuo Qingluan? Didn't she and Feng Wu used to be called the 2 genius girls of the imperial capital? That was big news. He immediately sent a young servant to deliver the message to Feng. Feng was hard to locate, so he found Granny Gong in the end. Granny Gong frowned when she saw the letter. Zhuo Qingluan? As in that young lady of the Zhuo family? The young servant said, yes, her. The maid is so arrogant. Granny Gong, what should we do? It seemed that someone had upset the crown prince recently, and he was very grumpy. The entire residence was on edge. The servant said, "Doesn't everyone say that His Royal Highness is fond of Miss Swa? Will he be less angry if we invite the lady here?" Granny Gong found the suggestion idiotic. Who said that His Royal Highness was fond of Zhuo Qingluan? She had to get rid of that rumor. She opened the letter to see that it had been written on top-quality paper, and the handwriting was beautiful as well. Before Granny Gong could make up her mind, Tonkei came in with someone else. That person was Zhen Xia, one of the head maids in the Crown Prince's residence. She showed Tonkei in. Zhen Xia smiled. "I saw that Tonkei came to see His Royal Highness when I returned, so I showed her in. She represents Firmament Palace, so we have to be polite. Don't you agree, Granny Gong?" Granny Gong narrowed her eyes. Zhen Xia only smiled innocently. Granny Gong said indifferently, "His Royal Highness isn't in. If Miss Swa wants to visit, please find another day." Tongchue's face darkened. She had never thought that a maid would stop her. Chapter 2402 Untitled. Chapter 2402 Untitled. People of Firmament Palace felt that they were better than everyone else, especially when that person was the maid of the Sacred Lady. Tonkei immediately put on a long face and said harshly, "Please tell His Royal Highness that I'm here. My Sacred Lady is waiting for a reply." Granny Gong remained unperturbed. "I have your letter here, but His Royal Highness is busy. He won't be seeing you today. Please leave." Tonkei was genuinely angry now. She was used to getting things her way in Firmament Palace. All the pupils used to fawn on her to get close to the Sacred Lady. At that thought, she smirked and said in a threatening tone, "There will be consequences if His Royal Highness is upset." She believed that her Sacred Lady was the most promising cultivator of her generation. Granny Gong was obviously displeased. She glanced at Xiang Tsao and turned around. "See her out." Granny Gong was angry as well. Xiang Tsao smiled at Tonkei. "Miss whatever you're called, please leave." Tonkei said, "I'm Tonkei, Miss Qingluan's maid." Miss Qingluan, the Sacred Lady? As impressive as that sounded, the title was nothing compared to that of a crown prince. A servant of the crown prince's residence wouldn't be threatened. Xiang Tsao said indifferently, "In that case, Miss Tonkei, please leave." Tonkei stomped her foot in frustration. These people. She decided that she was going to complain to the Sacred Lady. In Phoenix Yard. When Tonkei complained to Zhuo Qingluan about how arrogant the servants of the Crown Prince's residence were. Smack! Zhuo Qingluan slapped her. "My lady, why?" Tonkei looked at her in disbelief. Zhuo Qingluan's face was livid. Tonkei didn't understand. "My lady, His Royal Highness is so fond of you. If he knows how rude his servants are, he'll definitely punish them." The slap calmed Tonkei down, and she tried to comfort her mistress. Zhuo Qingluan didn't know what to say. Even she had to show Granny Gong some respect, but Tonkei had. How dare she? Tonkei had no idea that the rumor that Jun Linyuan was fond of Zhuo Qingluan came from people whom Zhuo Qingluan had hired. But she couldn't tell Tonkei that since it would be so humiliating. The person that told you off was Granny Gong. From now on, when you deal with her, Zhuo Qingluan took a deep breath. What? Do we have to deal with that fierce woman again? Tonkei thought in frustration. Zhuo Qingluan kept her gaze on her. From now on, show her some respect. At least until she married Jun Linyuan. She could tell that Tonkei was still unconvinced, so she smirked. "If I see that you're doing things behind my back, I have more than enough replacements for you." Those words made Tonkei go pale. She dropped to her knees and swore that she would respect Granny Gong from now on. After that, Zhuo Qingluan remained in a bad mood. Tonkei stumbled back in fear. She knew that it was the silence before a storm, and she wanted to run away. Just then, they heard footsteps. It was Mrs. Zwa. Chapter 2403 Untitled. Chapter 2403 Untitled. Mrs. Zwa came with Granny Tao and Xiao, her young maid. She was thrilled to see Zwa Qingluan and quickly walked up to her. Luan, it's been 5 years and I finally get to see you again. Luan, you're such a big girl now. Mrs. Zwa was so excited that she was in tears, but Zwa Qingluan only seemed impatient. After much thought, Mrs. Zwa decided to tell Zwa Qingluan about her siblings, otherwise she wouldn't be able to sleep. I'm in a bad mood now. Please leave, Zwa Qingluan said coldly before Mrs. Zwa could finish. Mrs. Zwa felt like she had just been slapped. Xiao, her maid, felt sorry for her. She stepped forward on Mrs. Zwa's behalf. Miss Qingluan, isn't this a bit outrageous? During the years you were away, your mother missed you so much she could barely eat or sleep. How can you treat your mother like this? That's so cold. Miss Qingluan, do you know? Mrs. Zwa was relieved that someone was speaking up for her. However, Zwa Qingluan kept her cold gaze on Xiao and asked calmly, Are you telling me off now? Xiao stopped abruptly. Miss Qingluan, I'm just. Yes, you are, Zwa Qingluan said calmly. Then, smack! She slapped Xiao. Xiao was just a maid with no spiritual essence. But Zwa Qingluan was a powerful spiritual king. And she didn't try to hold back her strength. Poof! Xiao's face, more precisely, her whole head, exploded. She dropped to the ground and died. Gosh! Granny Tao almost passed out. Miss Qingluan had just. Mrs. Zwa stared at Zwa Qingluan in disbelief as well. Qingluan, you. Why was her daughter like this? What had she experienced in Firmament Palace? Why was she surprised? Zwa Qingluan looked at Mrs. Zwa indifferently. After Feng Wu, people's lives just didn't matter to her anymore. Get her out of here! Zwa Qingluan had come back with a lot of servants this time. After that, 2 silent men came out. One dragged Xiao out and the other one cleaned the floor. Soon, it seemed that nothing had happened. Mrs. Zwa was still in shock. Qingluan, you, Mrs. Zwa was shaking from head to toe. Mother, please leave. I need to cultivate now. Zwa Qingluan sounded as if she was talking to a stranger. Mrs. Zwa felt a chill run down her spine. Granny Tao walked her out after that. Thump! The door to Phoenix Yard closed. Mrs. Zwa put a hand on her chest and panted. She pointed at Phoenix Yard but couldn't utter a word. How did she become like this? How? She's so cold. I'm her mother. She had just killed her mother's maid. Chapter 2404 Untitled. Chapter 2404 Untitled. Granny Tao was frightened as well. This also successfully terrified the rest of the manor, and everyone was now afraid of Zwa Qingluan. Miss Qingluan has grown up, that was all Granny Tao could say. After Mrs. Zwa left, Zwa Qingluan looked at Tonke. Tonke shivered and dropped to her knees. As Zwa Qingluan's personal maid, Tonke knew better than anyone else how cold-blooded the sacred lady was. Everyone else was like ants in her eyes. Go ask around. Find out where His Royal Highness is today. Zwa Qingluan's expression became a little softer when she thought about Jun Linyuan. Tonke stole a glance at her mistress. Seeing the soft look on her face, Tonke didn't relax. Instead, it only gave her a strange feeling, and a chill ran down her spine. Yes. Tonke promptly left after that. Zwa Qingluan had bought off some maids in the Crown Prince's residence already, so Tonke could easily find out where the Crown Prince was. The 9th hall. Hearing that, Zwa Qingluan looked pleased. Good. I'll run into him there, she said to herself. Tonke kept her head lowered, but she was filled with doubts. All this time, she and everyone else in Firmament Palace had been told that the Crown Prince was deeply in love with their sacred lady. But it seemed now that her mistress was having trouble even seeing the crown prince. What was wrong? Fallen Star Yard. Chowga came back with the news. Xiao Wu, His Royal Highness will be at the 9th Hall today. The 9th Hall? Good. Let's go, said Feng Wu happily. She had just made up her mind that she would finish this task as soon as she could manage. Since there was no way around it, the sooner she could complete it, the better it would be. To make Jun Linyuan fall in love with her. Feng Wu buried her face in her hands. It sounded so embarrassing, but to save her beautiful master, she had to do it. However, she felt that to make Jun Linyuan fall in love with her would definitely be very difficult. She kept thinking about it on her way to the 9th Hall, so focused that she didn't notice her surroundings. As soon as she arrived, she saw her archenemy. Zhuo Qingluan? Feng Wu frowned. Today wasn't her lucky day. When she saw Zhuo Qingluan saw her as well. Their eyes met. Time seemed to go back 5 years. The road outside the 9th Hall was bustling. Both girls were the center of attention. When people saw the two of them run into each other, they couldn't wait to see something happen. Since they were all from influential families, they weren't as obvious about it as the common people. They were filled with curiosity, but they didn't say anything. Zhuo Qingluan's gaze only landed on Feng Wu for a split second before she looked away as if Feng Wu didn't exist. Chapter 2405 Untitled. Chapter 2405 Untitled. She ignored Feng Wu. She completely ignored Feng Wu. The crowd was shocked that Zhuo Qingluan made it seem like she hadn't seen Feng Wu. If Zhuo Qingluan looked displeased, that meant that Feng Wu could still affect her. But it seemed that Feng Wu was no more than an ant. Zhuo Qingluan turned around and walked into the building with Tongke. Chowga only realized what had happened when they were gone. She was furious. Xiao Wu, she ignored you. Chowga stomped her foot angrily. How can she be so arrogant? Who does she think she is, a princess? I'm so mad. Feng Wu looked pensive. She found Zhuo Qingluan's attitude quite interesting. Let's go. She led Chowga inside as well. But the crowd still waited outside. They had all seen Zhuo Qingluan's attitude and were waiting for some more drama. Isn't Zhuo Qingluan supposed to be very powerful now? I heard that she's already a spiritual king. Really? I thought that Feng Wu was making some rapid progress, but Zhuo Qingluan is even faster. Of course. Zhuo Qingluan has the true phoenix blood. Have you ever heard of that particular saying? Do you mean the one which says that when the dragon and phoenix join hands, we'll have eternal peace? Yes, that one. Does the phoenix refer to the Feng clan? No, it doesn't. It refers to the true phoenix blood. As for the dragon, of course, it refers to the royal family. His Royal Highness is the next true dragon. So, you're saying that His Royal Highness and Zhuo Qingluan. Exactly. That makes sense. See, His Royal Highness is the most capable teenager of his generation. That's true. Not only is Miss Zhuo Qingluan from one of the 9 major families, she's also the pupil of the Master of Firmament Palace. No other girl her age has achieved that. Gosh, a spiritual king. She's amazing. Plus, she also has the true phoenix blood. That's one of a kind. So, shouldn't she be His Royal Highness's future wife? Someone said timidly. I think Miss Feng Wu is just as good as she is. Many people retorted. Miss Feng Wu? Yes, she's good, but she doesn't have the true phoenix blood. But she used to. Not anymore. It means that she just isn't lucky enough to possess it. It's natural selection. I agree. She's just not built for such blessings. Chapter 2406 Untitled. Chapter 2406 Untitled. Many people shook their heads. Zhuo Qingluan was walking up the stairs when she heard the conversation. she smiled a little. Behind her, Feng Wu shook her head in resignation. Xiao Wu, aren't you angry? She's the one. Chaoga pointed at Zhuo Qingluan and was furious. Feng Wu smiled. Already upset? That's nothing. Chaoga said, What do you mean? Feng Wu patted her shoulder. Don't worry. We'll soon get back at her in relation to what she cares about the most. Chaoga lowered her voice and asked, What's that? Feng Wu was speechless. What do you think? Chaoga's eyes lit up. Do you mean? Feng Wu stopped her. Don't spoil it just yet. Chaoga was thrilled. She held Feng Wu's hand and said excitedly, Xiao Wu, you can like His Royal Highness now. I won't be unhappy. Let's upset her as much as we can. Feng Wu said, Were you unhappy before? Chaoga said, Well. Feng Wu patted her head. Don't worry. I only need Jun Linyuan to fall in love with me. As for me, Feng Wu thought about the handsome teenager and let her voice trail off. Chaoga didn't understand why Feng Wu stopped talking all of a sudden. Just then, someone showed up. Miss Yu. Feng Wu had dealt with Yen Yu several times before. Yen Yu smiled politely at Feng Wu, but she was filled with emotion. If she hadn't seen how the Crown Prince treated Feng Wu, she would never believe that her young master had such a gentle side. But she would never tell another soul. Miss Feng Wu. Yen Yu smiled at her. Are you here for His Royal Highness? Feng Wu would have said no on a normal occasion, but she nodded this time. Yen Yu led Feng Wu to the 8th floor of the tower. Each floor of the tower had an entry requirement, and to enter the 8th floor, one had to be either a spiritual king or a very influential figure of the empire. Right now, there were only 2 people there. They were Zhuo Qingluan and Tongke. Recalling how grumpy her young master had been recently, Yen Yu was even more polite to Feng Wu. She hoped that the sight of Feng Wu would appease the Crown Prince. Miss Feng, please wait here. I'll come back for you when His Royal Highness is free. Meanwhile, a maid was serving tea to Zhuo Qingluan. Yen Yu personally took a cup of tea from the tray and put it next to Feng Wu. She was the head of this tower, and she had just served Feng Wu a cup of tea. Zhuo Qingluan was perplexed. Although she wanted to ignore Feng Wu, Yen Yu was hovering. Zhuo Qingluan hated to think that Yen Yu was attending to Feng Wu like a maid, but that was exactly what it was. The sacred lady's face was livid. She thought very highly of herself and wouldn't speak to Feng Wu, so she glanced at Tongke. In Zhuo Qingluan's circle, Feng Wu had always been a villain, so Tongke thought that she knew everything about Feng Wu. Chapter 2407 Untitled. Chapter 2407 Untitled. Tongke gave Feng Wu an arrogant look and frowned at Yen Yu. Miss Yu, isn't this inappropriate? Yen Yu was attending to Feng Wu's needs. Seeing Feng Wu eat another strawberry, she made a mental note that she would prepare more strawberries for Feng Wu next time. Just then, she heard Tongchue's voice. Yen Yu frowned and glanced at her. What's inappropriate? Tongke said. Doesn't the tower have rules? Chief Yen Yu, you of all people should know what visitors belong to which floor. Yen Yu said, Of course I do. Tongke was almost rendered speechless. She snorted and pointed at Feng Wu. If that's the case, why is she here on the 8th floor? Zhuo Qingluan was here because she was a spiritual king, but why was Feng Wu here? Yen Yu looked from Tongke to Zhuo Qingluan and frowned. She was indeed the head of the 9-story tower, and many people in the imperial capital tried to curry favor with her, but at the end of the day, she was only the crown prince's subordinate. Therefore, despite knowing that the crown prince was interested in Feng Wu, she also thought that Zhuo Qingluan might stand a chance. Thus, she wasn't going to offend Zhuo Qingluan. However, she didn't like Tongchue's attitude either. Miss Feng Wu is qualified to be here. Yen Yu smiled mildly and looked at Zhuo Qingluan. Zhuo Qingluan looked displeased. What if my sacred lady insists that she should leave? Tongke retorted. Miss Yu, will you do this favor for Firmament Palace? She thought that the mention of Firmament Palace would persuade Yen Yu. Tongke smiled, and Zhuo Qingluan still ignored Feng Wu. She decided that ignoring Feng Wu was her most formidable weapon. To their surprise, Yen Yu smiled and said, "I'm sorry, but I can't do that." "You!" Tongke glared at Yen Yu. Zhuo Qingluan was going to ignore Feng Wu to the end, but it now seemed that wasn't going to work. She picked up her cup and sipped her tea before glancing coldly at Yen Yu. "I see that Chief Yen Yu is going to disappoint me." Yen Yu felt a chill run down her spine, but she was sensible enough to know which side she should take. Therefore, she remained unperturbed and said, "If a guest is qualified to come up to this floor, I have no reason to stop them. Miss Zhuo, there's nothing I can do." Zhuo Qingluan didn't expect Yen Yu to turn her down. Tongke smirked. "Miss Yu, didn't you hear? Miss Feng Wu here isn't exactly a rich person. When we gave out gift envelopes yesterday, she was hiding among the common people and trying to get some small change. Do you think a person like that is worthy of the 8th floor?" The entire imperial capital had heard about it, and Yen Yu was no exception. She looked from the confident Zhuo Qingluan to the unperturbed Feng Wu. Chapter 2408 Untitled. Chapter 2408 Untitled. Based on what Yen Yu heard, she felt that both girls stood a chance of winning Jun Linyuan's heart. Therefore, she decided to wait and see. Just then, they heard movements upstairs, and both Feng Wu and Zhuo Qingluan rose to their feet. Yen Yu smiled bitterly and said, "I think His Royal Highness is up. I'll report to him first. Please wait here." She was curious about which girl the Crown Prince would see first. Naturally, that would mean that he cared about that girl more. As soon as Yen Yu was gone, the atmosphere in the room became quite tense. Feng Wu was smiling, and Zhuo Qingluan was sipping her tea. Chaoga and Tongke looked like they wanted to tear out each other's hair. Tongke lost control first. She sneered at Chaoga and said, "She's completely useless. Why would His Royal Highness want to see her?" Chaoga was furious. "Who did you just call useless?" Tongke said, "She doesn't have the true phoenix blood anymore. What else can she be?" She said those things to provoke Feng Wu. To her surprise, Feng Wu didn't react to her words at all. Instead, Chaoga jumped to her feet. Yen Yu went to see Jun Linyuan. The Crown Prince had just finished his cultivation and opened his eyes. Feng Sun was sitting next to him. Hearing what Yen Yu said, he sprang to his feet and headed for the door. "Feng Wu is here with Zhuo Qingluan? Gosh, I hope they won't start a fight." By the time he got there, Chaoga and Tongke were already fighting. Because Chaoga had slapped Tongke. Tongke had thought that with her own cultivation level, and the fact that she was from Firmament Palace, she could easily take down Chaoga, but she had no idea that Chaoga was almost a spiritual lord now. Therefore, smack! It was so loud that Tongke almost fainted with humiliation. "How dare you!" Tongke wanted to hit Chaoga, but she wasn't capable enough, and almost got slapped again. Zhuo Qingluan couldn't sit still anymore. She planned to ignore Feng Wu at first because she thought that Feng Wu was no more than an ant. However, Feng Wu's friend had just hit her maid. Formidable energy poured out of her body, rushing toward Chaoga. How dare Duan Chaoga humiliate her maid? Chaoga was chilled to the bone and couldn't even move a finger. She felt like a drowning man. But soon, she felt warm spiritual essence from Feng Wu's direction. It shielded her from Zhuo Qingluan's attack. No one could gain the upper hand. Feng Wu wasn't surprised because she had always known how capable Zhuo Qingluan was. But Zhuo Qingluan was astonished. She rose to her feet and stared at Feng Wu. She still remembered Feng Wu as she was 5 years ago. That afternoon, after her true phoenix blood was destroyed, Feng Wu lay in the mud and was on the verge of dying. But now, Feng Wu stopped her attack. Chapter 2409 Untitled. Chapter 2409 Untitled. How was that even possible? Zhuo Qingluan couldn't help but look shocked. She stared at Feng Wu and said, "You really have started cultivating again." More than one person had written letters to tell her, and Mu Yaoyao even went to Firmament Palace in person. But Zhuo Qingluan never thought much of it. Since Feng Wu's true phoenix blood had been destroyed, Zhuo Qingluan decided that no matter how hard Feng Wu tried, she would still be useless. However, Zhuo Qingluan had just learned how capable Feng Wu was. Hence, she exerted more power. She was very alarmed now. However, after she increased the energy she exerted, so did Feng Wu. They were well matched in strength again. You! Now, Zhuo Qingluan was really alarmed. She was about to increase the energy she was exerting to crush Feng Wu, when she heard a hearty laugh. What a scene! You guys are fighting. Don't you know that fighting is forbidden in the tower? Plus, pretty girls shouldn't be violent. As soon as Feng Sun showed up, the tension immediately dissolved. Both Zhuo Qingluan and Feng Wu had to withdraw their energy. Zhuo Qingluan couldn't ignore Feng Wu anymore. I'm impressed. Zhuo Qingluan's face was livid, and her tone could chill one to the bone. Feng Wu smiled. You'll be impressed even more later, Miss Qingyun. The name, Qingyun, felt like a slap to Zhuo Qingluan's face. Zhuo Qingyun was Zhuo Qingluan's original name. When Feng Wu's cultivation ability was destroyed 5 years ago, Zhuo Qingyun became the only one with the true phoenix blood. She then changed her name to Zhuo Qingluan, indicating that she was the real phoenix. She stared at Feng Wu and spoke in the same condescending tone. I'm offended. Feng Wu said, Really? I'm so scared. Zhuo Qingluan said, I had forgotten about you, and you could have lived a safe life, but you just had to walk into my sight. Why do you have to be my enemy? Do you have a death wish? As the sacred lady of Firmament Palace, Zhuo Qingluan always gave off a formidable air. When she looked down at Feng Wu, the energy around her was terrifying. Chaoga felt a chill run down her spine. But Feng Wu didn't seem affected at all. I have no wish to abandon my life, so I'm not the one that's going to die. She smiled. Zhuo Qingluan said, Is that so? I can't wait. Seeing that they were bickering again, Feng Sun stopped them. Are you archenemies? Why are you quarreling all the time? Feng Sun scratched his head. Yes, Feng Wu and Zhuo Qingluan answered in unison. Feng Sun cleared his throat. Zhuo Qingluan glared at him. I want to see the Crown Prince. You need to tell His Royal Highness. Chapter 24:10 Untitled. Chapter 24:10 Untitled. Thinking about how they had been friends when they were kids, Zhuo Qingluan made that request to Feng Sun. She recalled that Feng Sun had liked to tease her when they were little. When she grew up, she was told that boys liked doing such things to girls they liked. Hence, she was certain that Feng Sun was fond of her. She knew how to use that kind of affection. Feng Sun gave her a strange look. He didn't think that they were so familiar with each other. Zhuo Qingluan frowned and stared at Feng Sun. Didn't you hear what I said? Feng Sun had no idea what Zhuo Qingluan thought about him because he had never fancied her that way. He had indeed teased Zhuo Qingluan when they were little and even tried to frighten her with frogs, but that was purely because he wanted to pick on her. He didn't like Zhuo Qingluan's commanding tone and pretended not to hear her. He walked to Feng Wu's side and patted her on the shoulder. Xiao Wu, are you hungry? Do you want to eat something? Boss Jun hasn't finished cultivating yet and still needs a moment. Feng Wu asked, Is he cultivating? Feng Sun said, Yes, and it's very important. Maybe he can even make a breakthrough. Don't worry, Feng is there with him. Feng Wu said, You can eat with me then. Feng Sun's eyes lit up when he saw the lunchbox in Feng Wu's hands. Is that your cooking? He had tried Feng Wu's cooking in northern border city once, and he had been thinking about it ever since. Unfortunately, Feng Wu had never cooked for him again. Feng Wu nodded. I made it myself. Do you want some? Of course. I'm not an idiot, Feng Sun immediately said. After that, he started taking plates out of the box in great excitement. He had meant to talk to Zhuo Qingluan, but when he saw the food, he forgot all about her. Zhuo Qingluan frowned when she saw how familiar Feng Wu and Feng Sun were with each other. What was going on? She had only been gone for 5 years. Why did it feel like everything had changed? Since when were Feng Wu and Feng Sun good friends? She had wanted to show off her friendship in front of Feng Wu, but as it turned out, Feng Wu was more welcome here. If it wasn't for Jun Linyuan, Zhuo Qingluan would have stormed off already. She was so frustrated. Feng Sun knew little of her feelings. He was practically dumping food in his mouth by the plate. It was so spicy that he was in tears, but it was so delicious. Looking up, he saw Zhuo Qingluan's livid face and felt that he should show her some hospitality, so he asked her, "Would you like some? Xiao Wu made it herself. It's so good." Zhuo Qingluan was furious. If it was made by Feng Wu, she would have nothing to do with it. But she had to keep calm because she was supposed to be the forever calm sacred lady. She glanced at Feng Sun and said contemptuously, "You're a young lord, for God's sake. How can you eat something so crude?" Feng Sun was displeased. Crude? It was scrumptious. Chapter 24:11 Untitled. Chapter 24:11 Untitled. He hadn't wanted Zhuo Qingluan to feel left out, so he had invited her to join him, but she said such insulting words. Feng Sun lost his temper. "What did you just call Xiao Wu's food? Boss Jun loves it. Are you saying that Boss Jun has bad taste?" He wasn't going to tolerate Zhuo Qingluan's attitude. Zhuo Qingluan believed that Feng Sun used to fancy her and might still have feelings for her, but now, he was shouting at her. She was Zhuo Qingluan. She was so frustrated that she wanted to cry. Luckily, she had a tough mind and only needed a moment before she adjusted her mood. She told herself that he was only Feng Sun, not Jun Linyuan. However, the thought of Feng Sun being on Feng Wu's side made her want to choke Feng Wu to death. But the crown prince wouldn't be on Feng Wu's side. That thought calmed her down. Soon, Feng Sun finished all the food Feng Wu brought. He would have licked the plates clean if the gravy wasn't so spicy. Feng Wu was bewildered as well. Feng Sun said, "Well, Xiao Wu, don't tell Boss Jun you brought food with you. Otherwise, he'll kill me." Zhuo Qingluan snorted inwardly. His Royal Highness was the most elegant person in the world, and would never like such food. At that thought, she liked Feng Sun even less. Just then, Yan Yu came back. Feng Wu and Zhuo Qingluan both looked at her. Before, Feng Wu couldn't stay away far enough from Jun Linyuan, but today was different. She didn't want to be defeated by Zhuo Qingluan. Zhuo Qingluan was much more confident in comparison. She believed that she and Jun Linyuan had always been close, unlike Feng Wu, who had been rejected by Jun Linyuan before. The two of them decided that the first person Jun Linyuan wanted to see was the more important one. Yan Yu looked from Feng Wu to Zhuo Qingluan before she said, "His Royal Highness wants to see you both." Both. Feng Wu glanced at Zhuo Qingluan. Didn't Feng Sun say that Jun Linyuan didn't like Zhuo Qingluan? Why would he want to see her? Zhuo Qingluan glanced at Feng Wu and wondered why the crown prince would see her if he disliked her. Had His Royal Highness already gotten used to having Feng Wu around? Zhuo Qingluan became even more alarmed. She began to regret it. If she had known that something like this would happen, she would have listened to Mu Yaoyao and come back earlier. No, if she had known, she would have killed Feng Wu when she had the chance. When they walked up the stairs, Zhuo Qingluan glanced at Feng Wu and knocked into her. Feng Wu was shoved to the side. If Feng Sun hadn't caught her in time, Feng Wu would have rolled down the stairs. He glared at Zhuo Qingluan. "You've crossed the line. Since Zhuo Qingluan had decided that Feng Sun was her enemy, she smirked. Feng Sun, you'd better stay out of it. Feng Sun lost his temper as well. He was a young lord and was nice to Feng Wu because he liked her, but Zhuo Qingluan wasn't Feng Wu. Feng Sun smirked. Chapter 24:12 Zhuo Qingluan's Envy 1. Chapter 24:12 Zhuo Qingluan's Envy 1. Feng Sun snorted but didn't say anything. He had made up his mind. Feng Wu couldn't help but glance at Zhuo Qingluan. The girl was much more aggressive than she had been 5 years ago. Back then, she would never have talked to Feng Sun like that. The combination of Firmament Palace and the Zhuo family had made her very confident. However, she wanted to laugh when she recalled what happened earlier. Zhuo Qingluan had wanted to show off her friendship with Feng Sun, but had only been embarrassed by Feng Sun's response. And Feng Wu didn't try to muffle her laughter. Hearing it, Zhuo Qingluan looked at her, and their eyes met. Although Feng Wu didn't say anything, Zhuo Qingluan still guessed what she was thinking. She blushed in fury before her face turned livid. She couldn't understand it. She had worked so hard in the past 5 years and had surpassed all cultivators of her generation. She had thought that when she came back, Feng Wu would be as invisible as a grain of sand in comparison. But now, she had to personally handle Feng Wu herself. She had considered Feng Wu as something so unworthy. Zhuo Qingluan frowned and was furious. The door opened. She immediately saw the teenager that she had been thinking about all the time. He was as eye-catching and majestic as ever. One couldn't help but feel intimidated by his presence. He seemed to be standing on top of the highest mountain. And he was unapproachable. Thud, thud, thud. Even someone as arrogant as Zhuo Qingluan couldn't help but feel her heart pounding. All the so-called geniuses out there were completely useless when compared with him. Zhuo Qingluan took a deep breath and clenched her fist. She had worked so hard just to be able to stand side by side with him one day, to look down upon everyone else. After telling herself not to get nervous, Zhuo Qingluan breathed out and looked up at the man she deemed perfect. She wanted to use her best smile and voice when she told him, "Your Royal Highness, your Luan is back." But what did she see? For an instant, she forgot to breathe. Feng Wu ran toward Jun Linyuan like a capering bird. "Hey, Jun Linyuan, what were you doing? You kept me waiting for so long." Feng Wu jabbed Jun Linyuan's chest with a long finger. Zhuo Qingluan couldn't believe what she saw. She was furious. Had Feng Wu lost her mind? How could she get so close to His Royal Highness and touch him? Even she was too nervous to walk up to Jun Linyuan. She was a nobody. How dare she? She had no right. Zhuo Qingluan believed that His Royal Highness would throw Feng Wu out of the room immediately. She could barely contain her jealousy and hatred. But, to her surprise... Chapter 24:13 Zhuo Qingluan's Envy 2. Chapter 24:13 Zhuo Qingluan's Envy 2. But to Zhuo Qingluan's surprise, Feng Wu remained where she was. Why? Zhuo Qingluan studied the Crown Prince carefully. Jun Linyuan's face was expressionless, but the look in his eyes was very cold. Zhuo Qingluan grew confident again. This was the Crown Prince she remembered. She gave Feng Wu a contemptuous look. Right now, Feng Wu had raised her head and was looking at His Royal Highness with her unblinking gaze. How dare she look His Royal Highness straight in the eye? "Feng Wu, you're so dead," Zhuo Qingluan gloated inwardly. She was convinced that Feng Wu didn't know the Crown Prince well because she didn't know that she should keep her distance. His Royal Highness hated it when girls got too close. Zhuo Qingluan was glad that she still knew the Crown Prince the best. However, the Crown Prince went on staring at Feng Wu. And Feng Wu kept smiling at him. Then Zhuo Qingluan saw Feng Wu beaming at Jun Linyuan. Her smile was like the first streak of light in the morning. Her smile is so silly. Mine is much more attractive. Zhuo Qingluan smirked inwardly. She wanted to see what Feng Wu was trying to do. Despite Feng Wu's bright smile, the crown prince remained expressionless. If anything, his eyes seemed to turn even darker. He then turned away from her. You couldn't run away from me fast enough at the Gu Manor. Why are you smiling at me now? The more he thought about it, the more frustrated he became. Feng Wu had no idea how petty the crown prince could be, but instinct told her that Jun Linyuan was angry. Normally, she wouldn't try to please him, but today was different. Jun Linyuan turned to face the table. There was no room in front of him, so Feng Wu couldn't make him look at her. She needed to find another way. Without thinking, Feng Wu climbed onto the table and sat down. Zhuo Qingluan wanted to scream. Did she know what she was sitting on? There was a painting on the table. Zhuo Qingluan recognized at once that it was Jun Linyuan's work. The crown prince's work was very valuable, and many people would pay a small fortune for a piece. Because he injected his cultivation energy into his paintings and calligraphy. If one could comprehend a piece, it would greatly benefit their cultivation. As for how expensive Jun Linyuan's work could be, the prices were frighteningly high. Zhuo Qingluan had given out a big quadrangle dwelling as her top prize, but one written word from the crown prince was worth 100 such houses. But Feng Wu had just sat on it. Zhuo Qingluan usually wasn't so jumpy, but... Chapter 24:14 Zhuo Qingluan's Envy 3. Chapter 24:14 Zhuo Qingluan's Envy 3. But the crown prince seldom wrote anything, and there were only a handful of his works on the market. Feng Wu didn't like the feeling of sitting on paper, so she dragged the paper out from under her bottom, crumpled it up, and threw it into a corner. Crumpled and thrown away. Zhuo Qingluan felt dizzy, but she soon grew excited. Because she knew that Feng Wu was doomed. However, Jun Linyuan didn't slap Feng Wu, nor did he throw her out the window. Instead, he snorted and turned away again. Zhuo Qingluan was glad to see that Jun Linyuan despised Feng Wu. She just couldn't understand. How could Feng Wu still sit on the desk when the crown prince obviously didn't want to see her? Then Feng Wu did something that Zhuo Qingluan deemed utterly shameless. That was because Feng Wu was tugging at Jun Linyuan's sleeve. Seeing this, Zhuo Qingluan almost couldn't maintain her composure. She clenched her fists in her sleeves, and blue veins popped on the back of her hands. She wanted to choke Feng Wu. How could she touch His Royal Highness's sleeve? And she was even swaying it. Feng Wu was also giving Jun Linyuan a lost puppy look. Meanwhile, she called the crown prince softly. Brother Jun. Shut up. You shameless woman, thought Zhuo Qingluan. Her heart was pounding, and she wanted to slap Feng Wu. Your Royal Highness, do something. Kill this shameless woman. Zhuo Qingluan thought furiously, hoping that the crown prince would punish Feng Wu. However, the crown prince only glanced at Feng Wu. There was a glimmer in his eyes. What? He stared at Feng Wu. By then, he no longer looked so displeased. Feng Wu smiled obsequiously. Your Royal Highness, did you make a breakthrough? At Jun Linyuan's level, breakthroughs were extremely difficult to achieve. Other people would have been thrilled, but he only nodded indifferently. But Feng Wu needed some excitement. This was such a great opportunity. She rested her chin on her hands and looked at Jun Linyuan with twinkling eyes. Really? Brother Jun, did you make a breakthrough? Wow. You're so amazing. There's no one like you. You're like a god to me. Instantly, everyone fell silent. Feng Sun gave Feng Wu a strange look. Zhuo Qingluan was so furious that she thought her head was going to explode. She looked at Jun Linyuan. It was obvious that Feng Wu was pretending. It was such a humiliation to the crown prince, and she was sure that His Royal Highness would kill Feng Wu. Chapter 24:15 Zhua Qingluan's Envy 4. Chapter 24:15 Zhua Qingluan's Envy 4. While Zhua Qingluan was looking expectantly at the crown prince, he was looking at Feng Wu. Although he immediately saw that Feng Wu was only pretending, the crown prince enjoyed it very much. His earlobes had turned a little pinker, but it was too subtle to pick up. To other people, he was still the same proud teenager. After giving Feng Wu a stern look, he turned away from her again. It's too late for that, thought Jun Linyuan. But Feng Wu wouldn't give up. She had been a well-trained secret agent in her previous life, and her acting skills were impeccable. She knew exactly what a teenage girl should look like when she worshipped an idol. She realized that tugging at his sleeve alone wasn't enough, so she moved closer and wrapped her arms around Jun Linyuan's. Brother Jun. The crown prince's heart rate quickened. If there was a detector around, it would be able to see his heart rate rising. 150, 160, 170, 250, 260, 270. Thump, thump, thump. He thought his heart was going to jump out of his throat. Stop it. Pull yourself together, Jun Linyuan told himself. Seeing how awkward he looked, Feng Wu asked innocently, Brother Jun, do you not feel well? Why are your cheeks so hot? She then put her hand on his forehead. She's touching him. Zhua Qingluan's eyes pop. His Royal Highness hates other people touching him. And she's touching his skin directly. Zhua Qingluan remembered when they were at school, she had tried to touch Jun Linyuan's finger when he was napping. But before she could do it, Jun Linyuan waved his hand in his sleep and shoved her away. She still remembered the human-shaped crater she made when she smashed into the wall. Because of that, Zhua Qingluan both worshipped and feared Jun Linyuan. She didn't dare express her feelings for him, and could only spread rumors about them being a couple. That was right, she went to school with all the princes and young lords when she was little. Because of the privileged circle she was in, she had always felt that she was better than Feng Wu. At that thought, she stared at Feng Wu's arms, which were wrapped around Jun Linyuan's arm. You're dead. Although Zhua Qingluan expected that Feng Wu would smash into the wall at any moment, Jun Linyuan didn't do anything. Well, he did try to take back his arm. But he only pretended to do so. With his capability, of course he could easily release his arm from Feng Wu's clasp. He looked down at Feng Wu and said, Let go. Chapter 24:16 Furious Sacred Lady 1. Chapter 24:16 Furious Sacred Lady 1. Feng Wu said, No, I won't. If she had a tail, she would be wagging it by now. Does she think she's a dog? Zhua Qingluan found Feng Wu's behavior unspeakable. A young lady should be graceful and reserved. Feng Wu looks like a woman who entertains men for a living, thought Zhua Qingluan. She was waiting for the wise crown prince to see through Feng Wu. But she was doomed to be disappointed. After pretending to try and take back his arm, Jun Linyuan simply let Feng Wu hold it. What? Zhua Qingluan was furious. Jun Linyuan looked down at Feng Wu and said, Are you a puppy? Stop whimpering. Somehow, Zhua Qingluan felt that there was affection in his voice. No. It can't be. I must have heard it wrong. While interacting with Jun Linyuan, Feng Wu was also secretly observing Zhua Qingluan. Because she was the target of her trial. Why hadn't Zhua Qingluan lost her temper? She had to work harder. She had done more humiliating things in front of Jun Linyuan before. This was nothing to her. Feng Wu stood on the table and rested her hands on her waist. Jun Linyuan, you called me a puppy. If you don't say something nice, I'm going to be very mad. OMG. Zhua Qingluan was astonished. How dare Feng Wu speak to the crown prince like that? Does she know who he is? Even Feng Sun couldn't stand it for much longer. He kept looking around the room. Why was he being forced to watch this? Please make it stop. He poked Zhuo Qinghuan's arm with a finger. Hey hey! Zhuo Qinghuan's mind had gone blank, and Feng Sun's poke woke her up. She reminded herself that she was the chosen girl. She had been brought up as a genius, and was supported by both the Zhuo family and Firmament Palace. Even Jun Wuxiao was inferior in terms of status. Zhuo Qinghuan had always considered herself to be the most beautiful and talented teenager of the empire. But now, she felt that Feng Wu had just slapped her in the face. Rage burned inside her. At that moment, Feng Sun woke her up from her reverie. What? Zhuo Qinghuan's glance was very cold. It made Feng Sun jump. Seeing Feng Sun's astonished look, Zhuo Qinghuan finally returned to herself. I'm Zhuo Qinghuan, and I'm the sacred lady. How can I be jealous of Feng Wu? She's nothing. I would never envy a mortal. Chapter 24:17, Furious Sacred Lady 2. Chapter 24:17, Furious Sacred Lady 2. Zhuo Qinghuan took a deep breath and asked Feng Sun, "What are you suggesting?" Feng Sun looked from Feng Wu to Zhuo Qinghuan and realized what was going on. Zhuo Qinghuan was jealous of Feng Wu. That was to say, Zhuo Qinghuan was fond of Boss Jun. Feng Sun frowned. He had mixed feelings about that. He had been a little unhappy when he thought that Feng Wu was in love with Boss Jun, because he felt that now that his sister had a man, she wouldn't care about her brother so much. But when he saw that Zhuo Qinghuan wanted Jun Linyuan as well, he was on guard. Come with me. He headed for the door. Zhuo Qinghuan wouldn't move, but Feng Sun said coldly, "It's about Boss Jun." Zhuo Qinghuan was intrigued. Was Feng Sun angry? Was he in love with Feng Wu as well? That's always a possibility. I hate to admit it, but Feng Wu is a very pretty girl. I bet Feng Sun doesn't like seeing what's going on either. With that in mind, Zhuo Qinghuan followed Feng Sun out of the room. Outside, Feng Sun frowned and stared at Zhuo Qinghuan. Are you fond of Boss Jun? He got straight to the point. Once she was outside, Zhuo Qinghuan gradually regained her senses. She decided that she wouldn't embarrass herself over someone like Feng Wu. Feng Sun repeated the question. Are you fond of Boss Jun? Zhuo Qinghuan raised her chin and said coldly, You're thinking too much. Feng Sun kept his gaze on her. Am I? So, you're not in love with Boss Jun? Of course, Zhuo Qinghuan wouldn't admit her feelings. She believed that the first one to confess their affection would be the loser in a relationship. If she admitted it to Feng Sun now, the Crown Prince would soon know of it as well. When that happened, she would look too eager, which was against her plan. Zhuo Qinghuan had had 5 years to think about it in Firmament Palace, and she had observed many couples. She decided that she should never let a man know that she was in love with him. Otherwise, she would lose the battle for good. Feng Sun's frown grew bigger. Zhuo Qinghuan, I'm going to ask you one last time, are you really not in love with Boss Jun? Zhuo Qinghuan snorted. Yes, His Royal Highness is brilliant, but I'm not a nobody either. Why do I have to be in love with him? Do you think I'm as superficial as all those women? Feng Sun let out a breath of relief. I'm so glad to hear that. Good. You're not in love with Boss Jun. No, it's not good at all, thought Zhuo Qinghuan. She wanted to smack Feng Sun on the head, but she needed to force herself to keep her composure. And she feigned an indifferent attitude. Once that problem was solved, Feng Sun became much kinder. After all, they had gone to school together once. Qinghuan, that's the way to go. Feng Sun patted her on the shoulder. Since you're not Xiao Wu's rival in love, we can all be friends. Zhuo Qinghuan frowned and shoved Feng Sun away. Chapter 24:18, Furious Sacred Lady 3. Chapter 24:18, Furious Sacred Lady 3. It was true that to many teenage girls, Young Lord Feng was also an ideal future husband, but Zhuo Qingluan thought very highly of herself and only saw Feng Sun as Jun Linyuan's minion. Since she thought she was going to be Jun Linyuan's future wife, she didn't think much of Feng Sun. Feng Sun pursed his lips. "You do believe that you're the sacred lady, don't you? How arrogant." Zhuo Qingluan was so mad that she almost couldn't keep a straight face. She wanted to go back inside, but Feng Sun blocked her way. "Wait." She glared at Feng Sun. Feng Sun said, "Why are you still going inside?" Since she wouldn't be his friend, he wouldn't treat her like one. Zhuo Qingluan frowned at Feng Sun. Feng Sun said, "Can't you see what's going on inside? The two of them are having a moment together. Don't be a third wheel." Zhuo Qingluan's nails dug into her palms. "A moment together? Are they really a couple now? No, I won't have it." She scolded Feng Sun. "Do you know what you're suggesting?" Feng Sun said, "What do you mean?" Zhuo Qingluan said in a self-righteous tone, "You're ruining His Royal Highness's reputation. Feng Wu is a nobody. She can't have anything to do with the Crown Prince." Feng Sun glared at her, but Zhuo Qingluan went on before he could retort. "Feng Sun, you're His Royal Highness's best friend and should uphold his reputation. Feng Wu is worthless. She's detrimental to the Crown Prince." Feng Sun was infuriated. In his eyes, Xiao Wu was the best. She was beautiful, talented, and kind. Why was Zhuo Qingluan saying such things about her? Feng Sun said, "If Xiao Wu isn't worthy, who is? You?" That rendered Zhuo Qingluan speechless. She pointed at Feng Sun and said, "Feng Wu has brainwashed you. You're not His Royal Highness's friend." She stormed off after that. Tongke quickly ran after her. Feng Sun was furious. If Zhuo Qingluan hadn't left so soon, he would have hit her. "That woman is impossible. Is that what a sacred lady of Firmament Palace is supposed to be like?" he grumbled. Zhuo Qingluan was quite aloof when she was little, but she had still been a lovely girl. How did she become like this? Feng Sun was frustrated. Inside, Feng Wu didn't do anything else after Zhuo Qingluan left. She listened to the movements outside. She had planned to take her acting to a new level after Zhuo Qingluan came back. She would sit on Jun Linyuan's lap, and if that couldn't convince Zhuo Qingluan, she would do something even more outrageous. However, she only heard the sound of Zhuo Qingluan leaving. She felt defeated. "Are you upset?" The Crown Prince frowned. He looked in the direction of the door and seemed to realize something. Since the 11th trial wasn't finished yet, Feng Wu had to keep sucking up to Jun Linyuan. At that thought, she smiled wryly. "I'm not upset." Chapter 2419 Feng Wu's Birthday 1. Chapter 2419 Feng Wu's Birthday 1. Really? The Crown Prince glanced at Feng Wu and felt that he had missed something important. Seeing the pensive look on his face, Feng Wu felt uneasy. She was worried that Jun Linyuan would realize that she had been acting. That would put her in a very difficult spot. He would be furious. At that thought, Feng Wu changed the subject. "I still need to take care of something at home. I'm off. Bye." Before Jun Linyuan realized it, Feng Wu jumped out the window and was out of sight. She was so fast. Jun Linyuan didn't say anything. He could catch up with her if he wanted to, but what happened earlier was nagging at him, and he sat there, frowning. He then walked out of the room. Feng Sun was perplexed. "Where's Xiao Wu?" Jun Linyuan smirked. "She's gone. She ran faster than a thief." Feng Sun rubbed his nose. "Zhuo Qingluan is gone, and so is Xiao Wu. It's almost like she was putting on a show for Zhuo Qingluan." Boom! Those words sounded like a thunderclap in the Crown Prince's ears. Feng Sun saw Boss Jun suddenly stop walking, so he glanced at him. The Crown Prince's face was livid. Realizing what he had said, Feng Sun wanted to slap himself. Why did he say such things? He immediately tried to repair the damage. I'm talking nonsense. Xiao Wu was like this long before Zhuo Qingluan came back. Of course, it's not because of Zhuo Qingluan. Only then did the tension in the air disappear. Feng Sun sighed in relief. The intimidating energy from Boss Jun had almost crushed him. He stole a glance at Boss Jun and saw that he still wasn't in a good mood. When Feng Wu was around, he almost looked peaceful. But as soon as she was gone, he was back to being the intimidating crown prince. Feng Sun tried to strike up a conversation, but the crown prince never replied. They walked down the stairs together. When they reached the 4th floor, they heard voices inside. Do you know how embarrassing that Feng Wu is? The crown prince had been deep in thought, but that name triggered him again. Feng Sun looked at the room where the voice came from. Feng Wu? Do you mean the girl from the Feng clan? I heard that she started cultivating again and has been doing a good job. Yes, she has, but have you forgotten? 5 years ago, she was mentioned alongside Miss Zhuo Qingluan. Do you know what happened recently? What? Miss Qingluan, the sacred lady of Firmament Palace, came back in her phoenix carriage. That's right. And the magpies were giving out envelopes that contained vouchers. Guess what happened? Chapter 2420, Feng Wu's Birthday 2. Chapter 2420, Feng Wu's Birthday 2. All the guests in the tower were some kind of influential figures, otherwise they would never be able to get in. They didn't care if other people heard their conversation, but they had no idea that the most influential figure in the empire was listening in. And the magpies were giving out envelopes that contained vouchers. Guess what happened? What happened? Did you know that there was a top prize? Of course. It's a house with a big courtyard in the imperial capital. Yes, that's the prize. It must be worth a lot. Do you know who got the envelope? Who's the lucky person? Feng Wu. Feng Wu? As in the Feng Wu? That's her. Then she's quite lucky. No, she's not. Both she and Miss Qingluan had the true phoenix blood 5 years ago. Now, Miss Qingluan is already the sacred lady of Firmament Palace, but what about Feng Wu? She has to fight with the common people for petty gifts. Hearing that, everyone laughed. They had no idea that someone who cared a lot about Feng Wu had heard every word. The crown prince now had a murderous look in his eyes. Your Royal Highness, Yen Yu was with them. Hearing the conversation, she stepped out and reported in a low voice, "They're the children of some 5th-ranked officials. Their names are..." The crown prince only glanced at Yen Yu. Yen Yu knew that those officials were going to be demoted. She tried to explain on Feng Wu's behalf. I don't think Miss Feng Wu meant to take that envelope. She doesn't care about such things. She could tell that the crown prince was a little less furious when she said those words. She realized what the crown prince wanted to hear. She went on, because when I served tea to Miss Feng Wu, she gave that envelope to me as a tip. Here it is. Yen Yu then showed the envelope to Jun Linyuan. She felt a chill run down her spine. When the crown prince was angry, many people could die. That was a fact. Feng Sun snorted. Those people are abominable. How dare they talk about Xiao Wu behind her back? I'll teach them a lesson. Jun Linyuan didn't try to stop him. Just then, Yen Yu said, I remember that Miss Feng Wu's birthday is coming up. Because she knew that her master cared about Feng Wu, she had collected some information on her. Is it? Feng Sun's eyes lit up. When? And isn't Zhuo Qingluan's birthday on New Year's Eve? Yen Yu smiled. Miss Feng Wu's birthday is on that day as well. What? Feng Sun cried out. Really? What a coincidence. I didn't know. Chapter 2421 Feng Wu's Birthday 3. Chapter 2421 Feng Wu's Birthday 3. Yen Yu smiled. Probably because Miss Sua's birthday celebration is always very elaborate. Seeing the Crown Prince's attitude, Yen Yu knew which side she should stand on now. Feng Wu was a brilliant young lady, but Yen Yu wouldn't support Feng Wu just because she liked her. People like Yen Yu never revealed their own opinion. Their master's opinion was theirs. They would like whoever their master liked. Yen Yu was glad that she and her master liked the same person. Boss Jun, you've been to Zhuo Qinghuan's birthday party before. Do you remember? Feng Sun finally remembered something. You were already engaged to Xiao Wu, but you still went to Zhuo Qinghuan's party. Jun Linyuan looked confused. He couldn't remember. Feng Sun said in frustration, the guests here are all from good backgrounds, but they're still talking about Xiao Wu like that. Other people will just be meaner. Why did that girl take the envelope? Yen Yu spoke up at that moment. She casually said, Miss Feng Wu doesn't think much about the prize, so I don't think she meant to take the gift. Maybe it was meant to land in her hands. Feng Sun said, there were so many people. How could that envelope just happen to land in her hands, unless Zhuo Qinghuan purposefully? Wait, Zhuo Qinghuan didn't do it on purpose, did she? Yen Yu dropped the hint. Miss Qinghuan stormed off just then. Young Lord Feng, did you offend her? Feng Sun said, I wanted to talk to her outside because I saw that she was angry, but she somehow got offended. Forget about it. That's not important. He waved Yen Yu off. Yen Yu looked at him in resignation. Were all men so slow? She could tell why Zhuo Qinghuan was mad right away, but these men just couldn't see it. She had dropped all the hints she needed to drop, but he said that it wasn't important. At that thought, Yen Yu wanted to smack Feng Sun on the head. Feng Sun was already thinking about Feng Wu's birthday. He said, Xiao Wu will be 14 after New Year's Eve, and in the Junwu Empire, that makes her eligible for marriage. It's a very important birthday. Yen Yu glanced at Jun Linyuan. Although he didn't say anything, she could tell that he was thinking the same thing. The teenager just wouldn't speak his mind. Yen Yu immediately said, Miss Zhuo has given out gifts, so how about we do the same for Miss Feng Wu's birthday? Feng Sun said, that's not a bad idea, but won't those people say that Xiao Wu is copying Zhuo Qinghuan? Yen Yu said grumpily, giving out gift envelopes is a tradition. Miss Zhuo didn't invent it. Zhuo Qinghuan was only Miss Zhuo to her now. Plus, Yen Yu chuckled, Miss Feng Wu is so clever. I'm sure she'll use this opportunity well. Achoo! Feng Wu sneezed in Fallen Star Yard. Chapter 24-22 Feng Wu's Birthday 4 Chapter 24-22 Feng Wu's Birthday 4 Phoenix Yard, the Zhuo family. Zhuo Qinghuan had been angry the whole day. The entire Zhuo family felt very nervous. All the servants remained silent and worked efficiently, fearing that Miss Zhuo would vent her anger on them. In Zhuo Qinghuan's bedroom, Tongke still remembered what happened the day before. When the sacred lady entered her bedchamber, she tilted her head back and let out an angry roar. Instantly, all the wooden furniture was pulverized. There had been 2 maids in the room when they entered. They turned into puddles of blood as well right in front of Tongchue's eyes. Tongke was speechless. She had never seen the sacred lady so angry before. Zhuo Qinghuan was in a trance-like state the whole day. No one was allowed to get within 10 meters of her. She would kill anyone who dared to try. Tongke only moved closer after she saw that Zhuo Qinghuan didn't look so furious anymore. She had finally come up with an idea. Miss Qinghuan, Tongke knew what was on Zhuo Qinghuan's mind, so she carefully reminded her, I asked around after we got back yesterday. That Feng Wu really is a piece of work. Zhuo Qinghuan glared at her. She couldn't tolerate the mention of that name. However, Tongke hadn't served Zhuo Qinghuan for 5 years for no reason. She had a soft, steady voice and was very considerate. Miss Qingluan, you've been cultivating in Firmament Palace for the past 5 years, unlike her, who had all the time to hover around His Royal Highness. That's why the Crown Prince is more familiar with her. Tongke knew that she couldn't make it sound like Zhuo Qingluan was to be blamed. She needed to belittle Feng Wu as much as she could. If the sacred lady thought that she was being humiliated, Tongke knew that she was dead. She was right. Zhuo Qingluan had been spreading rumors, saying that the Crown Prince was so fond of her that she was the only candidate for his future wife. She had even fooled herself, not to mention Tongke. But Zhuo Qingluan was no fool. When she saw the Crown Prince's interaction with Feng Wu, she knew that there was something going on between them. Back then, she had been the only close female friend of the Crown Prince, but Feng Wu had basically replaced her now. It made her feel humiliated in front of Tongke. In her mind, no one was allowed to see that side of her. Tongchua's life was indeed in danger. But the young maid could read people well. She had seen that her life was in danger yesterday, but instead of running away, she faced the challenge head-on and went to check up on Feng Wu. They should have done that a long time ago. But Zhuo Qingluan had been ignoring Feng Wu because she thought she had taken Feng Wu out of the running 5 years ago. To her, Feng Wu wasn't even worth a glance. But Tongke realized how serious it was, so she went out for help. Firmament Palace had a branch in the imperial capital. It was known as Firmament Pavilion. They hired professional spies there, and it had only taken them a day to gather all the information Tongke needed. After reading what Feng Wu had been doing these days, Tongke was astonished. Chapter 24-23 Feng Wu's Birthday, 5. Chapter 24-23 Feng Wu's Birthday, 5. Tongke was shocked by how cunning Feng Wu was. Her sacred lady had definitely underestimated that woman. After putting all the information in order, Tongke put a 10 cm thick folder on Zhuo Qingluan's desk. The Zhuo family had efficiently restored the bedchamber 1 hour after it was destroyed. However, Mrs. Zhuo had forbidden anyone from spreading the news. Miss Qingluan, Tongke put the file on the desk, but Zhuo Qingluan still ignored her, so she reminded her mistress, "We should probably get to know our enemy better." Zhuo Qingluan frowned and looked like she was going to explode at any moment. If she lost her temper, things would get very ugly. Tongke bowed and left the room. After she was gone, Zhuo Qingluan's gaze moved to the file. Was that everything Feng Wu had done in the imperial capital in the past year? In fact, Zhenxia of the Crown Prince's residence, her mother, and many other people had all written to her, but she had burnt all the letters that had Feng Wu's name in it. Mu Yaoyao, her junior sister, went to Firmament Palace in person to beg for her to come back. She told Zhuo Qingluan that if she didn't come back soon, Feng Wu would steal the Crown Prince's heart. And what did Zhuo Qingluan say? She said that if a man could be stolen, he wasn't meant for her to keep. She still remembered how frustrated Mu Yaoyao had looked. She rubbed her forehead and looked at the file on the desk. How thick? Were there so many things to record? Before, Zhuo Qingluan would have burnt the file to ash. However, she remembered what Tongke said. We should know our enemy a little better. Taking a deep breath, Zhuo Qingluan fought back her repulsion and took the first booklet in the file. Northern Border City. She read from dawn to dusk. Tongke stayed outside the entire time, filled with anxiety. In front of everyone else, the sacred lady was as otherworldly as an immortal, but Tongke had been with her for many years, and she knew better. The real sacred lady was treacherous and ruthless. She wouldn't even blink when she killed someone, as if they were just an insect on the road. After she read Feng Wu's story, would they have to redo the bedroom again? Just then, she heard Zhuo Qingluan's calm voice. Bring Mu Yaoyao here. Mu Yaoyao had come back a few days earlier. Although she was the daughter of Lord Mu, to Zhuo Qingluan she was just another minion. Yes. Tongke was finally relieved. She knew that this was a historical moment, because her sacred lady was finally starting to pay attention to Feng Wu. Zhuo Qingluan looked at the booklet on the desk. It read, Feng Wu's birthday, New Year's Eve. She smirked. She remembered that 5 years ago the crown prince went to her birthday party in person and gave her a gift. This time, she would show Feng Wu that she was the woman the crown prince loved. Chapter 24-24 Gift Envelopes. Chapter 24-24 Gift Envelope. Fallen Star Yard. Whenever Feng Sun went to see Feng Wu there, he always jumped over the wall and never used the front door. The gate of Fallen Star Yard had been damaged and repaired again. Feng Wu then put inscriptions on the walls so that they wouldn't be damaged so easily. Xiao Wu. Feng Sun sat on the wall and waved at Feng Wu. Feng Wu was sitting on top of a tree and absorbing the spiritual essence in the morning sunlight. She opened her eyes to find the teenager beaming at her. Feng Sun. Feng Wu didn't move, so Feng Sun eagerly jumped into the tree and sat down next to her. The big tree had been in Fallen Star Yard for many years now. It would take 3 people to wrap their arms around the tree, and it was over 30 meters tall. Sitting on top, one could see the entire Feng Manor as well as the street outside. It was deep into winter and everything was covered by snow. On the street, the Feng clan had arranged for someone to clean up the snow outside the front gate. Around the corner, a few breakfast stalls had been set up, and the aroma was mouth-watering. Shall I buy you breakfast? Feng Wu glanced at Feng Sun. Although she could see everything up on the roof, it felt too far away from the common people, and she didn't like that feeling. She would rather blend in with the crowd. Breakfast? Great. Before Feng Sun could jump into the courtyard, Feng Wu led him to the other side of the wall and toward a street corner. There was a wonton stall with only a few customers. The owner was an elderly couple who seemed to know Feng Wu well. They asked, Miss Wu, do you want the usual? Small wontons with a lean meat baked bun? Feng Wu nodded with a smile. Feng Sun said, I'll have the same, but a large one. The elderly couple nodded. After ordering the food, Feng Sun asked curiously, Do you know them well? Feng Wu said, Their food tastes like home. Feng Sun said, You're such a strange girl. Feng Wu looked at him curiously. Feng Sun said, I thought noble young ladies like you would never eat on the side of the street. Zhuo Qingluan hated it. If she gets any of the smell in her hair, she'll wash it 3 times. Feng Wu said, How pretentious. That's so true. Feng Sun couldn't agree more. Before I knew you, I thought that all girls were like Zhuo Qingluan. I was so wrong. By the way, Feng Sun finally remembered why he was here today. Xiao Wu, I need to ask you something. What is it? Feng Wu asked. You never sound so humble. What's the question? Do you know how to give out gift envelopes? Feng Sun asked grumpily. Zhuo Qingluan came back with all those magpies and red envelopes, and I don't like it at all. Can you do something better? Something better? Of course Feng Wu could. In her previous life, Feng Wu was used to giving out and receiving gift envelope. She knew exactly what to do with them. Chapter 24-25 Dragon and Phoenix. Chapter 24-25 Dragon and Phoenix. Many big companies had also turned this activity into a profitable business, and Feng Wu knew that she could learn from them. However, why gift envelopes? Are you going to pay for them? Do you have too much money to burn? Feng Wu was perplexed. Feng Sun cleared his throat. He glanced at Feng Wu. Of course, it was because of Jun Linyuan, but he couldn't tell Feng Wu that. New Year's Eve is in a few days. What's wrong with giving out some gifts? Any ideas? Feng Sun grumbled. We have to do better than Zhuo Qingluan. Feng Wu said, but it'll cost you a lot of money. Feng Sun patted his chest. Money won't be a problem. I'll take care of it. Feng Wu asked, how big a scene do you want it to be? Feng Sun said, the bigger, the better. Feng Wu asked, are you sure? Feng Sun said, of course. Feng Wu rolled her eyes at him. She couldn't understand these rich people. The Zhuo family. Master Zhuo and Mrs. Zhuo were discussing in low voices. Apart from the first day, Qingluan has kept a low profile since she came back. We hardly ever see her. Master Zhuo nodded. Mrs. Zhuo said, her birthday is coming up. How about we throw her a big party? Master Zhuo asked, is it really necessary? Mrs. Zhuo said, of course it is. Have you forgotten who Qingluan is? She's the only girl with the true phoenix blood in the empire, and you know what that means. Everyone in the Junwu Empire knew what it meant. Noble families would often marry one another, including the imperial family. The true phoenix blood was one of the most prestigious bloodlines and almost as respected as the dragon bloodline. Not all imperial family members had the dragon bloodline. There would be one member at most in each generation. Sometimes, the entire living imperial family might not have it. For instance, no one in Emperor Wu's generation had it. Therefore, everyone was elated when they found that Jun Linyuan had the bloodline. That was why no matter what Jun Linyuan did, Emperor Wu would only shout at him but wouldn't actually do anything. With his dragon bloodline, it would only make sense that he should marry a girl with the true phoenix blood. Once the two bloodlines combined, they would probably have even more talented babies. Mrs. Zhuo was very pleased. His Royal Highness has the dragon bloodline, and Qingluan has the only true phoenix blood in the empire. She's the only girl His Royal Highness will marry. Master Zhuo was more level-headed than she was. You forgot about Feng Wu. Mrs. Zhuo smirked. You did that thing 5 years ago precisely because of Feng Wu, right? His Royal Highness had 2 choices, but now, he only has 1. Mrs. Zhuo didn't think much of it when she saw Master Zhuo's frown because she knew that her family was going to be connected to the imperial family by marriage. My lord, we were friendly with Prince Jun Linshan, but we can't do that now. After all, His Royal Highness is going to be Qingluan's future husband, so we should support him. Master Zhuo rolled his eyes at her. Everyone knows that Prince Jun Linshan can never replace the crown prince. His supporters are only making fools of themselves. His Majesty will only laugh it off. Chapter 24-26 Jun Linyuan isn't the only one I can marry. Chapter 24-26 Jun Linyuan isn't the only one I can marry. Whenever Emperor Wu got angry at Jun Linyuan, he wanted to urge Jun Linshan to compete with his brother, but that was very naive of him. Jun Linshan wasn't Jun Linyuan's match at all. Master Zhuo shook his head. But His Royal Highness treats Feng Wu differently. Master Zhuo frowned. I disagree. Mrs. Zhuo shook her head. Yes, His Royal Highness found Feng Wu special before, but that was when Luan hadn't come back. Now that she's here, things will be different. My lord, just think about Qingluan. She has the true phoenix blood and is the only perfect match for the dragon bloodline. And she's supported by both the Zhuo family and Firmament Palace. That's unmatched in the Junwu Empire. Moreover, she's very talented. She's only about to turn 18, but she's already a spiritual king. How formidable is that? Mrs. Zhuo listed Zhuo Qingluan's merits before naming Feng Wu's shortcomings. In the end, she reached the conclusion. His Royal Highness was only tricked by that Feng Wu because he doesn't know how brilliant Luan is. I believe that he'll come to his senses. The more she spoke, the more excited she became. Let's have a big celebration and show everyone how amazing Luan is. The entire imperial capital will talk about it, and His Royal Highness will have to listen. Of course, the most ideal situation is that His Royal Highness will come in person, said Mrs. Wait, I need to discuss it with Luan. In Phoenix Yard. My lady. Tonkei thought that her mistress was lost in thought, so she wanted to wake her up from her reverie. But in fact, Zhuo Qingluan was eavesdropping on her parent. Master Zhuo didn't set up a barrier when he spoke, and at Zhuo Qingluan's cultivation level, she could easily hear them. Zhuo Qingluan glanced at Tonkei and rose to her feet. Mrs. Zhuo was coming out with her maids when Zhuo Qingluan arrived. She was pleasantly surprised when she saw her daughter. Luan, I was going to see you, and you're here. What a coincidence. Come in. Mom and Dad have something to tell you. Zhuo Qingluan remained indifferent. She still used her condescending manner when she spoke to her parent. After they entered, Master Zhuo cleared his throat. Luan, there's no one else around, so just tell us, what do you think of His Royal Highness? Mrs. Zhuo rolled her eyes at her husband. What kind of question was that? Of course, everyone admired His Royal Highness. But Zhuo Qingluan frowned and said coldly, His Royal Highness is brilliant, but he's not the only one I can marry. What? Mrs. Zhuo paled. Luan, are you in love with someone else? Who is it? Is he from Firmament Palace? Zhuo Qingluan said, There's no one. I'm only saying that I'm just as brilliant as he is. If he marries me, I'll stand by his side, but if he won't, I can rise to the top myself. Mrs. Zhuo panicked. Who gave you that idea? What do you mean, if he won't? You have to marry him. Chapter 24-27, Where's His Royal Highness? 1. Chapter 24-27, Where's His Royal Highness? 1. Master Zhuo nodded and said, You're right. Mrs. Zhuo glared at him. No, she's not. We invested so much in her so that she can marry His Royal Highness. Master Zhuo said, His Royal Highness is brilliant, but so is Luan. She'll marry His Royal Highness one day, but she can't seem too eager. We should let other people hear her little speech as well. Mrs. Zhuo didn't understand. Master Zhuo patted Zhuo Qingluan's shoulder. That's good. You know what you're doing, and you have a clear goal. Although we've lost your siblings, with you here, the Zhuo family will still have a bright future. Only then did Zhuo Qingluan remember what she read in the file. What happened? Did Feng Wu kill them? She didn't trust what she heard from other people, so she asked her parents. Mrs. Zhuo had been waiting for that question for a long time, and she burst into tears. She added very colorful details to her description when she told Zhuo Qingluan how Zhuo Qingxian, Zhuo Qinglu, and Zhuo Qingyu died. In the end, she took Zhuo Qingluan's hand and wept. Feng Wu hated you for destroying her true phoenix blood, so she took it out on your siblings. Luan, you have to make her pay for what she did. Zhuo Qingluan didn't really care about her siblings, but she took what Feng Wu did personally. Mother, I'll avenge them. Don't worry, Zhuo Qingluan promised. Throw a big party for me. If you can, invite Feng Wu. Why? Mrs. Zhuo asked angrily. Because her birthday is on the same day, Zhuo Qingluan said viciously. She's already on guard. I don't think she'll come, said Mrs. Zhuo Qingluan smirked. Then she'll be a coward. Mrs. Zhuo didn't understand, but she trusted her clever daughter. By the way, send an invitation to the Crown Prince's residence as well, said Zhuo Qingluan before she left. Mrs. Zhuo was pleasantly surprised. She grabbed Master Zhuo's hand and said, Look, Luan really is fond of His Royal Highness. If we send the Crown Prince's residence an invitation, we should invite the other influential families as well. The entire imperial capital will see how miserable Feng Wu is in comparison. Master Zhuo didn't say anything, but instinct told him that things wouldn't be so simple. The Crown Prince's residence. Granny Gong frowned when she saw the invitation. Zhuo Qingluan's 18th birthday was coming up, and His Royal Highness was invited to the party. Granny Gong snorted, tossed the letter aside, and went back to what she was doing. She needed to prepare for something very important. Soon, it was New Year's Eve. The Zhuo family was packed. Many influential guests were there for the event. Even the main street outside was blocked by carriages. The Feng clan had no visitors at all. It was a stark contrast to the Zhuo family. There were guests from all 9 major clans. Even a royal banquet probably wouldn't have so many people. Where's His Royal Highness? That was the only thing Mrs. Zhuo cared about. Chapter 24-28, Where's His Royal Highness? 2. Chapter 24-28, Where's His Royal Highness? 2. It was a stark contrast to the Zhuo family. There were guests from all 9 major clans. Even a royal banquet probably wouldn't have so many people. Where's His Royal Highness? That was the only thing Mrs. Zhuo cared about. Granny Tao replied with a smile, "We sent invitations to the Crown Prince, young Lord Feng, and young Lord Xian." Mrs. Zhuo nodded. They were friends with Luan when they were little. I'm sure they'll be here to celebrate Luan's birthday. Granny Tao said, I'm sure they'll come. Just then, they heard the announcement outside. Princess Mu Yaoyao is here on behalf of the Mu family. Mrs. Zhuo said happily, Look, Princess Mu is here. Immediately after that, there was another announcement. Princess Jun Wuxia is here. Jun Wuxia and Zhuo Qingluan had been good friends since they were little. Her presence meant a lot. Unlike old Mrs. Gu's birthday, the guests weren't government officials. Most of them were noble ladies with their daughters, and some had brought their sons as well. After all, Zhuo Qingluan had many admirers. For instance, Mrs. Dugu brought both Dugu Yamo and Dugu Mengxi. The teenagers gathered in the garden, and the mothers and daughters stayed indoors and chatted. Of course, their conversation revolved around lavishing praise on Zhuo Qingluan. They all said that she was the most talented and capable young woman in the empire, and her true phoenix blood made her the only candidate for the future wife of the crown prince. Mrs. Tao and Tao Qingqing were there as well. They were in a quieter corner of the room. Mrs. Tao nudged Tao Qingqing. Why don't you say hello to Miss Qingluan? Tao Qingqing thought very highly of herself as well and didn't like the idea of sucking up to Zhuo Qingluan. Mrs. Tao lowered her voice and chided her daughter in a voice that only the two of them could hear. You're going to marry Prince Jun Linshan one day, and that will make you and Miss Qingluan sister-in-laws. Just go. Tao Qingqing said, Prince Jun Linshan doesn't get on well with His Royal Highness. Mrs. Tao said sternly, Use your brain. Prince Jun Linshan will never be the crown prince's match. He'll always be only a prince. Tao Qingqing said, Mother, how can you say such things about your future son-in-law? If that's the case, why do you want me to marry him? Mrs. Tao said, Do you think you can marry His Royal Highness then? Tao Qingqing said, Mother. Mrs. Tao was very direct. I'm not criticizing you, but you're just not the sharpest tool in the box. Your father and I have indulged you, and you've never been a hard-working cultivator. You're simply not Miss Qingluan's match. Tao Qingqing snorted. It's not certain that's what Qingluan will marry His Royal Highness. That Feng Wu has a chance too. Mrs. Tao rubbed her head affectionately and sighed. Sweetheart, you know nothing about marriage. Yes, His Royal Highness is fond of that girl, and we all can see it. So what? Tao Qingqing was confused. What do you mean? Chapter 24-29, Where's His Royal Highness? 3. Chapter 24-29, Where's His Royal Highness? 3. Mrs. Tao said, Marriage is the joining of two families, and the Feng family is nothing compared with the Zhuo family, not to mention that's what Qingluan is also connected to Firmament Palace. Although Feng Wu has been making fast progress, Zhuo Qingluan has the true phoenix blood. Do you know what that means? It means that she's the chosen one. But Feng Wu is so pretty, Tao Qingqing said. She's already so good-looking now. Just imagine how beautiful she'll be when she grows up. Mrs. Tao shook her head. Tao Qingqing was perplexed. Am I wrong? Of course you are. Mrs. Tao patted her head. You don't understand men at all. To men like His Royal Highness, a pretty girl like Feng Wu can be an addition to their collection, but someone like Zhuo Qingluan is the woman they'll marry. Tao Qingqing said, Is that so? Mrs. Tao said, Just wait and see. His Royal Highness and Zhuo Qingluan were childhood friends, and they're still very close. Today is Zhuo Qingluan's birthday. His Royal Highness will definitely come here. It'll be as good as an official announcement. After that, Zhuo Qingluan will be even more prestigious. Quickly, go talk to her before His Royal Highness arrives. Tao Qingqing mumbled, I feel sorry for Feng Wu then. I heard that she was still engaged to His Royal Highness. She then went to befriend Zhuo Qingluan. However, Zhuo Qingluan was so unapproachable. She glanced past Tao Qingqing as if she was invisible. She only showed her face for a brief moment before going inside, and probably wouldn't come back out again before the party started. Tao Qingqing was speechless. She stared at Zhuo Qingluan in disbelief. She was the daughter of a lord and was used to getting things her way. When she went to court, even Empress Dugu had taken her hands and praised her in front of His Majesty. But Zhuo Qingluan, she wasn't mean or said anything rude to her. She simply looked past Tao Qingqing as if she wasn't worth the energy. Tao Qingqing would rather hear some harsh words from her. That would make them enemies on equal footing. But Zhuo Qingluan made her feel like a nobody. That was so frustrating. Tao Qingqing stomped her foot and grumbled, His Royal Highness may not come. I don't think His Royal Highness will come, said a cold voice behind her. Tao Qingqing turned around and saw that it was Dugu Yamo. She asked, Why are you so sure? The Dugu family and the Zhuo family were related by marriage and were allies. She couldn't understand why Dugu Yamo said that. Do you fancy His Royal Highness? Tao Qingqing frowned. Chapter 2430 Where's His Royal Highness? 4. Chapter 2430 Where's His Royal Highness? 4. I don't deny that I used to be in love with His Royal Highness, but I fancy someone else now. Dugu Yamo smiled. Tao Qingqing didn't believe her. How can you like someone else after you've been in love with His Royal Highness? Dugu Yamo, you must be lying. So tell me, who's that person? It's Feng Wu. Dugu Yamo grinned. Tao Qingqing almost choked on her own spit. That's not funny. Dugu Yamo stopped joking. She looked at Tao Qingqing and asked seriously, Do you want to know the real Feng Wu? Tao Qingqing frowned. Do you know what she's really like? Dugu Yamo asked, Do you want to hear the story of how she was trapped in the tombs and how she fought against all odds and succeeded in the end? Tao Qingqing was intrigued. Tell me everything. Wow. Really? She's so smart. New. She turned a maid into an ultimate body, you said? That's so rare. Of course everyone will try to recruit her. What? Even that useless Duan Chaoga is a genius now? OMG. Did you say that Feng Wu spoke back to His Majesty? What? Feng Wu. Tao Qingqing kept crying out in surprise and making all kinds of exclamations. Meanwhile, Mrs. Zhuo was having a difficult time. Mrs. Tao asked a subtle question when she greeted Mrs. Will we be seeing His Royal Highness today? I had the pleasure to meet him once in the Gu family. I would be so honored to see the Crown Prince again. Mrs. Zhuo recalled what Zhuo Qingluan told her. Zhuo Qingluan said that she had personally sent another invitation to the Crown Prince, so he would definitely be here. All the noble ladies around them looked in their direction when Mrs. Tao asked the question. Most of them had decided to come here today because of the Crown Prince. The rumor outside was that the Crown Prince was deeply in love with Zhuo Qingluan, so they all wanted to see that side of June Linyuan. Mrs. Zhou forced a smile and said, Qingluan wrote the invitation herself, and His Royal Highness replied in person, saying that he would be here to celebrate Qingluan's birthday. You know how busy His Royal Highness is. I'm sure he's still working right now. That's right. State affairs are more important. I'm sure His Royal Highness will be here once he's free. Maybe he's already seeing the Sacred Lady in her room now. Ha ha. Once the subject was diverted, Mrs. Zhou quickly went outside. She grabbed Granny Tao and asked in a low, fierce voice, Is His Royal Highness here yet? Granny Tao had been waiting outside the front gate the whole time. She shook her head anxiously. Not yet. Then, has young Lord Feng arrived? Asked Mrs. Feng Sun was the Crown Prince's best buddy. Having him here would be the next best thing. Granny Tao still shook her head. I don't see him either. What about young Lord Xian? Chapter 2431 Miserable Feng Wu. Chapter 2431 Miserable Feng Wu. I haven't seen him. Mrs. Zhou wanted to slap Granny Tao. Could they have gone to Phoenix Yard directly? That was Mrs. Zhou's last hope. Granny Tao smiled bitterly and shook her head. If that was the case, Miss Qingluan wouldn't have smashed all those dishes. Mrs. Zhou shook her head and began to panic. If His Royal Highness didn't come, she couldn't imagine what would happen. Go find my husband, and send people to the Crown Prince's residence, Northern Feng Mansion, and Lord Xian's manor. If His Royal Highness doesn't come in the end, you have to get Feng Sun and Xian Yi here, even if you need to kidnap them. Yes. Granny Tao immediately went off to give out the order. Meanwhile, where was Feng Sun? And where was Xian Yi? They were both at the Crown Prince's residence. Boss June, it's Xiao Wu's birthday today. Aren't you going to tell her happy birthday in person? Feng Sun tried to take June Linyuan to Feng Wu. The Crown Prince was his usual self and refused to admit his feelings. He glanced at Feng Sun and waved him off. That won't be necessary. Feng stood by his side and looked down at his feet. He was venting his sarcasm inwardly. Before Feng Sun arrived, June Linyuan had changed outfits 13 times. The robes were either the wrong color or of poor design. He ended up complaining to the tailors. His Royal Highness had never tried on different clothes before. Feng Sun grabbed June Linyuan's arm. Just come with us and let's celebrate Xiao Wu's birthday for her. You have no idea how busy the Zhou family is today. On my way here, I saw that all the carriages were going that way. Nearly all the 9 major clans have sent someone to attend the party. Xiao Wu is so miserable in comparison. Her family doesn't like her either. I bet she's all alone right now. June Linyuan frowned a little. Feng knew that it was time for him to make an excuse for his young master, so he suggested, Your Royal Highness, your celebration plan for Miss Feng Wu will soon take place. Would you like to go to the Feng family and see the effect in person? June Linyuan glared at him. My plan. Of course it's your plan. You stayed up all night for it, thought Feng. But he knew the Crown Prince too well, so he immediately said, I mean, young Lord Feng's plan. Anyway, once those people cashed in the vouchers, they would still need to come to the Crown Prince's residence. Everyone would know then that the Crown Prince had funded the event. Feng Sun said, Boss June, just come with us. I feel so sorry for Xiao Wu. She's my sister, and you're my best friend. Won't you do me this favor? The Crown Prince rolled his eyes at him. Let go and I'll go with you. Fallen Star Yard. Feng Wu was cooking today. She had never felt the necessity of celebrating birthdays. As a result, only the people very close to her knew her birthday. She made 2 bowls of noodles, one for herself and the other for her mother. It was to thank the beautiful lady for giving birth to her. Then, she moved on to the spicy dishes. Miss, the Zhuo family is very busy today. Qiuling chatted with Feng Wu as she chopped up the peppers. Chapter 2432, They're Here, 1. Chapter 2432, They're Here, 1. Feng Wu loved Sichuan dishes, but she didn't have time to cook them too often. So she taught Qiuling how to make them. Qiuling was almost as good as Feng Wu, but Feng Wu was still the best. Therefore, Feng Wu decided to cook everything herself today. After chopping up the peppers, Qiuling moved on to sorting the vegetables. She told Feng Wu, the Zhuo family is very busy today because it's Zhuo Qingluan's birthday. She sounded upset when she said, every year, the Zhuo family has a big celebration, telling everyone that it's her birthday. Feng Wu rolled her eyes. Why do you even care? Qiuling was already an excellent cultivator, and many people had been trying to acquire her. She could easily become a core disciple in any family or sect, but here she was, doing housework like a common maid. Qiuling added, I heard that His Royal Highness is going to celebrate Miss Zhuo's birthday with her. Feng Wu felt a dull pain in her chest. Is that so? Qiuling said, that's right. They all say that His Royal Highness is very close to Miss Zhuo and they'll soon be engaged. But how can that be? You're already engaged to His Royal Highness. She tried to comfort Feng Wu. Miss, please don't be sad. Feng Wu rolled her eyes at Qiuling. Why should I be sad? It's not like I actually like him. Is that so? Qiuling wasn't convinced. She noticed that Feng Wu was very serious today. Usually, she would chat happily while she was cooking. Their initial plan was to make 6 dishes, but Feng Wu came up with another 4 and made 10 in total. There was fish, meat, tofu, and more meat. Every dish was covered with red chili, and the aroma made one's mouth water. The beautiful lady had already taken her seat. Her slender hands were in her lap, and she had the most elegant posture, which reminded one of a white swan. However, she was practically drooling over the dishes, like a 5-year-old. Seeing this, Feng Wu felt her spirits lift. I wished Xiaoqi were here, but traveling with Grand Secretary Feng must be very helpful to him. However, the beautiful lady acted as if she couldn't hear Feng Wu. Feng Wu then picked out some food for her. Although she loved Feng Wu's food, she only had the appetite of a bird. Feng Wu then took off her apron. Tielo, go get the elders. Chowga said, I thought they never left the restricted area. Feng Wu chuckled. Till invite them. It'll be up to them whether they want to come here or not. After all, it was New Year's Eve. She handed the apron to Chowga and jumped out the window, soon disappearing into the night. In the restricted area, the noise outside only made this place feel more lonely. The 3 elders were Elder Breeze, Elder Jing, and Elder Grain. Chapter 2433, They're Here, 2. Chapter 2433, They're Here, 2. Where Feng Wu was concerned, Elder Breeze remained neutral, and Elder Jing was on her side. Elder Grain used to support Feng Yanfeng, but after what happened previously, his attitude toward Feng Wu had changed, though he would still pick on her from time to time. Eat outside? No way. Elder Grain shook his head when he heard the suggestion. Kiddo, we can't leave this place. Plus, you can't buy me off with a single meal. Feng Wu sat down in front of him and grinned. But didn't you tell Feng Yanfeng off for me already? Elder Grain said, that was because he crossed the line. I wasn't helping you. He crossed his arms and raised his chin. Feng Wu wanted to laugh, but she fought it back. She knew that the old man would be mad at her if she burst out laughing now. Making the trip here had cheered her up. She brushed away her frustrated thoughts and asked, Are you really not coming? Today is my birthday. Birthday? Elder Jing was persuaded. Elder Grain said, I won't go even if you were getting married today. Feng Wu said, fine. Here's an appetizer for you. If you like it, there's more in Fallen Star Yard. She had packed a tiny portion of each dish, but they still looked very delicious. Seeing that she was leaving, Elder Grain grumbled, when are you going to pull yourself together? What? Feng Wu was confused. Elder Grain glanced at her and said contemptuously, your fiancé is celebrating another girl's birthday right now. Feng Wu was speechless. Why did she have to hear this even when she was no longer in Fallen Star Yard? She made a mental note to blame it on Jun Linyuan. Then she asked curiously, how do you know that it's Sua Qingluan's birthday today? Elder Grain said smugly, since your last visit, I've been in charge of gathering information. I know everything. He still held a grudge against Feng Yanfeng for trying to fool him. He couldn't be bothered to deal with Feng Yanfeng just yet, but that didn't mean that he had forgotten about it. Feng Wu said grumpily, why do you care about such gossip? If you have the time, work on your cultivation. The entire clan is counting on you lot. She didn't want to linger on the subject, so she turned to leave. Elder Grain said, I know what you're doing. Your man was stolen by some flirtatious woman, so you're lashing out at me. Feng Wu clenched her fists. She told herself to calm down, but she wanted to shout at Jun Linyuan. Elder Jing glared at Elder Grain. Why did you say that? The girl is already so sad, you should be gentle. What if she cries? Feng Wu wanted to tell them that she wasn't sad at all. Elder Grain grumbled, I just can't believe it. That Jun Linyuan boy is the most excellent cultivator ever, and he should marry our girl, not that Sua Qingluan. Elder Jing gave him some of the food Feng Wu brought. Just eat your dinner. Gosh, it's so good. Elder Grain's eyes widened. Chapter 2434, They're Here, 3. Chapter 2434, They're Here, 3. When Feng Wu retuned to Fallen Star Yard, she heard cheerful activity inside. Feng Sun said, That's hilarious. Chaoga, guess what? We all received her invitation. Chaoga said, So, did you come here after you went to her party? Feng Sun said, Of course not. We never went there. We weren't anywhere close to that house. Chaoga said, But everyone has been saying how much His Royal Highness likes that sacred lady. Not only was he going to attend the party, he was also going to give her a gift. Feng Sun said, And what? Chaoga said, And I heard that His Royal Highness was going to announce today that he was going to marry Sua Qingluan. Nonsense. Feng Sun grew agitated. Of course not. Boss Jun is going to marry Xiao Wu. He'll never marry that pretentious woman. Chaoga looked at Jun Linyuan. Jun Linyuan glanced at her with his brooding eyes. Chaoga sucked in her breath. She dared to bicker with Feng Sun, but she was intimidated whenever Jun Linyuan was present. She didn't even dare to meet his gaze, let alone question him. So, Jun Linyuan hadn't gone to the Zhou family. Feng Wu raised her eyebrows. Who's out there? Me. Feng Wu walked in. She walked into the courtyard to meet Jun Linyuan's brooding eyes. She felt that he could see right through her. What was that supposed to mean? She looked away to avoid his gaze. Why are you here? She tried to walk past Jun Linyuan to sit on the other side, but Feng Sun wouldn't let her. He pressed her down in the empty chair next to Jun Linyuan and chuckled. Where do you think you're going? Here's your seat. Why should she sit next to Jun Linyuan? Feng Wu glared at Feng Sun and asked, Why must I sit here? TT was as if she had been labeled Jun Linyuan's girl. Feng Wu decided that she would like someone else. She couldn't afford to have such a connection with him. Of course you have to sit here. Feng Sun grinned. His Royal Highness is the most prestigious person here, so he has to take the host's seat. You're the birthday girl, so it only makes sense that you sit in the second best seat. Feng Wu blushed. Am I wrong? Where should you sit? Feng Sun looked confused. Feng Wu wondered if he was saying it on purpose. To avoid embarrassment, she changed the subject. Shouldn't all of you be with the Zhuo family right now? Feng Sun snorted. He sat right next to Feng Wu and was very close. Feng Wu asked, "What's that look on your face?" Feng Sun sighed. "Why do you even ask? For her birthday, Zhuo Qingluan and her mother each sent us an invitation, but what about you? You didn't even send us a note." Feng Wu said, "Well." Chapter 2435, They're Here, 4. Chapter 2435, They're Here, 4. Feng Sun snorted. "We wouldn't have come here if we hadn't felt sorry for you. We knew that you would be so lonely." Feng Wu said, "But I'm not lonely at all." Feng Sun said, "Of course you're lonely. All the influential figures of the imperial capital are at the Zhuo residence, and you're all on your own. If we hadn't come here, your place would look abandoned." Feng Sun took a bite of the fish as he teased Feng Wu. This whole time, Feng Wu could feel a pair of eyes on her. She felt her cheeks heat up. But she didn't look back and pretended that she couldn't feel it. For some unknown reason, the more intense the gaze, the longer she spoke to Feng Sun. She said, "Why do I get the feeling that you're here for my food instead of me?" Feng Sun chuckled, awkwardly. "It's the same thing. It's the same thing." Soon, the 10 dishes were eaten up, and there was only some gravy left on the plate. Her eyes unexpectedly met Jun Linyuan's gaze. This time, he quickly looked away. Feng Wu was surprised. Would someone like him feel shy? Was he? Feng Wu couldn't be sure. But soon, the crown prince came back to his senses, and he turned his aggressive gaze on Feng Wu again. Feng Wu now decided that she must have been seeing things. Of course the man couldn't feel shy. While Xian Yi was observing them, Feng Sun was busy cleaning the plates. He didn't notice any interaction between Feng Wu and Jun Linyuan. Feng Sun said, "Xiao Wu, you should really make some friends. We're the only people that would celebrate your birthday with you." Feng Wu wanted to smack him on the head. Feng Sun said, "You don't even have a visitor from your clan. You really don't get along well with your family members." "How blunt," he said. "How about we make a bet? I'll lose if you have one visitor from your clan. How about that?" Feng Wu wouldn't respond. Feng Sun said, "If you win, I'll help you whenever you have to face Zhuo Qingluan. And if I win, you have to do something for me." Feng Wu chuckled. "Deal." Just then, they heard footsteps outside. "Xiao Wu, where's the food you promised us?" Elder Jing walked in, followed by the reluctant Elder Grain. Feng Sun's eyes widened. Who were these people? Elder Jing and Elder Grain also stared at them in bewilderment. Before, when they were cut off from the outside world, they hardly knew anyone, but since they started gathering information, they couldn't avoid hearing these teenagers' names. Jun Linyuan? Elder Jing's eyes lit up. Jun Linyuan had obviously recognized them, and he looked amazed, but he soon regained his poise. Chapter 2436, Untitled. Chapter 2436, Untitled. Even when facing the elders, the crown prince remained seated in the host's seat. He nodded at the 2 old men. That was the most polite greeting he could offer. Elder Jing didn't think much of it, but Elder Grain was surprised. Wasn't Jun Linyuan the crown prince who had been seduced by that Zhuo girl? Elder Grain stared at Jun Linyuan and wanted to give him a speech, but when he saw the look in his eyes, he backed off. Feng Wu glanced at Feng Sun. "You lost." Feng Sun felt like he had just slapped himself. Elder Jing turned to look at Feng Wu. Can't you be a little more generous? You only gave us a mouthful of each dish, and we barely tasted everything before the plates were empty. Elder Grain was so grumpy. Elder Grain grumbled, No, I wasn't. Elder Jing said, Fine. You weren't. Someone else was too embarrassed to come here alone and forced me to come with him. Feng Lan Jing. Elder Jing stomped his foot in frustration. Elder Jing chuckled. Whatever you say. Xiao Wu, where's our food? Seeing that Elder Breeze wasn't here, Feng Wu knew that the chief elder must have stayed behind to guard the restricted area. She was speechless when she saw the empty plates on the table. Since when did Feng Sun lick the plates clean? TL cook something right now. Just wait here. Feng Sun, you chat with the elders. Qiuling, come and help me in the kitchen. Feng Wu gave them a nod before going into the kitchen. Elder Jing looked amazed when he saw Qiuling. That's a very talented girl. Elder Grain nodded. Yes, she's much better than some of the kids of our clan. I don't know what's happened to this clan, but the younger generation is such rubbish. Feng Sun patted Elder Grain on the shoulder. What should I call you? Elder Grain glared at him. How rude. Elder Jing looked Feng Sun up and down. You're Feng Biting's son, aren't you? How's your dad doing? Feng Sun asked, Do you know my dad? Elder Grain said, I even know your grandpa. We had an epic fight here in the imperial capital once. Didn't your grandpa tell you anything? Feng Sun stuttered, Are you Feng Chengu? That makes him Feng Lanjin. You've finally figured it out. Elder Grain put a few peanuts into his mouth. I remember that many excellent cultivators died in that battle, and the rumor was that the two of you also. Elder Grain said, Do people still know us? Feng Sun said, Of course. You're two of the most famous cultivators ever. I didn't expect to see you alive. He was glad that the two old men liked Feng Wu. They could help her greatly in battle. Less than an hour later, Feng Wu started serving new dishes. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.